but soon it was clear that they might be intercepted if they did so. In response, he had marched the force north to Solpants, but even here scouts stalked his force and his outriders continually clashed with those of Lord Tully. As a way to throw off the enemy, he had changed direction once again and marched on Castle d'Ari. He had reached the castle without any more problems and had received a very generous welcome. He had let the army rest for a day, as he talked a lot with d'Ari's castellan. The lord was with Rob, while its heir was safely away in Riverrun. He vaguely remembered him to be some kind of friend of Bran. Now their march would soon be over. His men would be safe. The fact no enemy had come across here in a while, could even be seen in the landscape. Fields were becoming green again and the last autumn fruits hang from the trees. It was a beautiful morning. It was somewhat cold for Riverland standards, but in Winterfell this would still have been a beautiful summer day. His men's morale was high after their rest and the fact he had managed to convince them that they had accomplished their tasks. He had also promised them a small celebration for their victory and this went a long way. He tugged at the feeling at the back of his head and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he saw the army camp next to Harrenhal. He smelled the fields and the animals on it and heard their sounds. He wanted to run around and look for prey, but he had to remind himself he was in Ghost. He struggled for control for a few seconds, before he looked around and saw the coast was clear. Then he left Ghost and went back to himself. He had sent Ghost out to scout in front of them and it seemed no danger was between them and their objective. He could slip into his mind with ease now, although taking control was still difficult at times. This was even more so when he was further away. The last part of the ride went off without a hitch, as Ghost's scouting proved invaluable. Soon he was riding through one of the monstrous gates of Harrenhal and his brother was there waiting for him. They embraced fiercely and he reported on his mission. Robb thanked him and promised to send scouts to Maidenpool to discover if the Reach took it or not. Afterwards he went to clean himself up, while his Winterfell men were guided towards their barracks. The Riverlanders were brought towards the army site, where they could put their tents up next to their countrymen. 2 days later. Robb. He had received word from White Harbour and he expected it to be about Moat Cailin. He had gathered his most trusted commanders around him, and he looked at them before breaking the merman seal. Dear King Robb. I have the joy to notify you that Moat Cailin has fallen. The united force took the castle from the north side, while Robert Glover engaged the Ironborn from the south. Lord Reed's help proved invaluable, as he managed to bring men right under the fortress walls at the southwestern point without being seen. Around 400 men were lost in the fighting. Most wounded and not dead, but they'll take weeks to recover back to fighting strength, if they do so at all. This leaves just over 3,000 men for you to command at Moat Cailin. I have other good news as well. Our fleet has finished building. 52 warships are yours to command. As asked, I have assessed the strength of House Sunderland and I think we can take them on the seas. If you give me the command, I will recall my cousin and his almost 500 men and start preparing for an attack on Sisterton. Your loyal vassal. Wyman Marndaeli. Lord of White Harbour and Warden of the White Knife. A huge weight fell off his shoulders reading that letter. Moat Cailin, the gate of the north, was theirs again. On top of that, they had their first fleet again since Brandon the Burner. He looked around the room and saw that his advisors looked pleased as well. Moat Cailin is finally ours. The Ironborn are thrown back in the sea where they belong. This is very good news. Lord Karstark summarized the first part of the news. Although I'm more interested in the news of the fleet. We all knew the moat was going to fall sooner rather than later. The fact that the fleet is ready now, just after the Vale asked for help, means something. Jon responded. Why? We can sink the Sunderland's naval strength but the Marndaelis won't have enough troops to attack Sisterton. Even if they do, that means we need to peel off some of the strength we can send down. Lord Rickard asked. It does. However, I think it is necessary that we help the Vale. Especially now that Lady Lysa and Littlefinger have aligned themselves with the Lannisters. Jon explained. His father-in-law wouldn't give in so easily. Before the coming of the Ironborn we had 5,000 extra men we could send down. The fact we now opened Moat Cailin means we can finally send these reinforcements down, albeit with some losses. At last we can send over 4,000 Northmen, hardened by battles against the Ironborn, south. Together with Robert's men, this will prove a real boon against the Reachmen. That's 6,000 veterans joining our force. That could easily decide the coming battles for us. Yes, it could, but it could also be our downfall. Sir Bryndon joined in. How so? Lord Ricard asked. Well, we could end up with a few thousand Vale Knights in the back if we don't do something. Let's say we manage to win a battle against the Reach, without it being decisive enough to win the war. We slowly start turning the war and then we confront the Lannisters in battle only to get jumped by 8,000 Vale Riders in the back. Another possibility is that we win the war, capture King's Landing and then get invaded by the Vale. This would mean we had to fight another conflict with all our forces exhausted. They could even cut us off from our supply lines in Riverrun and the north if we are at the capital. Aelys' father grunted at that, but he could see in his facial expressions that even he was convinced they had to do something. We also have another possible problem, my lords. We have beaten back the Ironborn and made them bleed for their invasion. However, most of their strength in the form of the Iron Fleet, still escaped. They took many losses taking the moat and left a rearguard that is now gone, but they are still of considerable strength. If they choose to invade the north a second time, we will be hard-pressed once more. He added to the conversation. But they won't have the benefit of surprise. That will mean a lot. It would be stupid of them to try it again. Any gains they make will be paid in blood 10 times over now. John said. But the Ironborn are notoriously stupid, aren't they? Lord Ricard summarized the problem with that statement. So, what do we do? John asked. In the long term, many things need to change. Our west coast is simply too exposed. Too many lands lay bare and are depopulated. I have been toying with the plan to strengthen those again after the war, but for now we can't do much. I have sent word to the Flints, Dustins, Riswells, Mormonts, Tall Hearts and Glovers to reinforce their keeps and lands. They are also ordered to frequently scout their entire coasts. If the Ironborn come, we will know. At this, his advisers nodded. Lord Hornwood will take command of Moat Cailin with his men and some others, he has free rein to organize its defense. He finished. What will make sure the same thing won't happen again? Harley's had put many of his men in Moat Cailin before and looked to its defense and it was still taken. Lord Karstark asked. They weren't expecting an attack from the north and west then. Even so, the enemy still lost a lot of men. Now, our troops will be awaiting them. If they manage to take the fortress at all, it will cost them many thousands of soldiers. This would de facto mean the destruction of half the Iron Fleet on land. He summarized the difference. John, who was bent over a map of the area, suddenly proposed. Can we implement a system of watchtowers along the Salt Spear? We can make it well fortified and thought out after the war. Wooden towers with firewood beacons will do for now. It could signal both to the moat and to Barrowton when the Ironborn come back. It will be reasonably quick to implement and won't come at a big cost of either men or materials. We have wood aplenty in the north so that shouldn't matter. He thought over the proposal and came to the conclusion he liked it. I will send letters to House Dustin, House Stout and Lord Harley's to start on the construction immediately. John nodded happily at that, glad that he could contribute to the defense of their homeland. Now, what to do with the forces up north and the fleet? He asked his advisers. Well, I think it has been established that the Mandaealis need to attack Sisterton. They'll need men to do so. Lord Karstark said. Haven't we discussed this before? John asked. Weren't we of a mind to send the Lock and Flint recruits with them do so, before the Reach started moving north? If I'm right, we even discussed sending the Widow's Watch veterans with them. We were. We have discussed that before. He responded. Everybody still in favor of this plan? He asked his advisers, and all agreed. The force, under the command of Sir Marlon Mandaealy will sink House Sunderland's ships, take Sisterton and the rest of the Three Sisters. After this, they will start harassing the smaller island lords to free our allies from their interference. At that stage we can look towards helping on the Vale mainland against Houses Linderley and Corbray, but I don't think we should decide that now. None of his trusted men objected. Good. If I remember correctly, I also proposed augmenting Robet's force with the Sawin and Castle recruits so we could at least send those back south. His father-in-law brought the issue of reinforcements up again. That would leave Lord Harley's with around 600 men, mostly his own troops and those of the Flints of Flint's Finger. That should be enough if they are warned. I intend to send the Dustin troops back to Barrowton. The town is too juicy a target for the Ironborn and I don't intend to leave it undefended. He explained. You would send the other 2,000 men south? The Blackfish asked, and he nodded in response. We need at least some reinforcements. This will give it to us. What about the clans? They field close to 3,000 men. John asked. I want to leave them in the north. House Glover is really weak, and they are busy reinforcing Deepwood Motte. They can also serve as a kind of task force. Anywhere the Ironborn attack, they can march to expel them quickly. This way, the Northern Lords don't need to fear for their holdings too much while we still keep their men with us in the Riverlands. This idea seemed to be well received and he finished the meeting there. Sir Bryndon and Lord Ricard quickly left the room, while John stayed. They had arranged to talk about their warging right now. He wanted to be up to date on his brother's skills because he might be able to use them for the coming battles. He also wanted to learn as much as possible in the limited time available to him. He knew he had a special connection to Grey Wind, but he just didn't have enough time to explore it just yet. 4 days later. Ever since the last meeting with his advisors, he had spent every minute of his free time thinking about improving the defenses of the north. After studying many maps and documents, he had even gone so far as interviewing Ricard Riswell, Sir Helman Tallheart and Lord Galbart Glover. He had also had a less official conversation with Roderick Dustin, who knew parts of the area well. His conclusions were damning. The western side of his kingdom was underpopulated, underdeveloped and lacked basic infrastructure. It had not enough defenses or even nobles to properly protect the area. Notable areas where this was less the case were the more inland areas of the Rills, the Barrowlands and deeper inside the Wolf's Wood. Bear Island was a notable exception, the warrior culture of the island having enabled them to keep up reasonable population numbers even though fishing villages were either rare or heavily defended. The other coastal areas, from Cape Crooken to the Bay of Ice, were all underpopulated. Especially if you compared it to the area around the White Knife, but even further up along the eastern coast the Flint, Hornwood, Bolton and Carstark lands were much better off than them. This couldn't be able to continue. The lack of leadership in the area was also shocking. On the east side, you had the Mondalis who controlled much of the territory with a number of smaller but independent lords like the Locks and Flints around them. Further up you had the Boltons and then the Carstarks, all strong houses ready to take the lead if anything happened in their region. On the west side, the hold of the Flints over Flint's Finger was always tedious when Ironborn showed up. The only force of stability were the Dustins and Riswells, although the latter had no naval capability to speak of. It was no surprise that these houses allied together as much as they did, combined they controlled the whole southwestern region. Further north you had the Glovers, although their power was more directed towards their inland areas in the Wolfwood. They were also not as strong as the aforementioned houses, so they couldn't afford to focus both on the woods and the sea. In between them, from the Stony Shore up until Sea Dragon Point, no house really ruled. There were a few very minor houses in the region who collected taxes in peacetime, but they weren't strong enough to defend the territory except for maybe 1 or 2 villages and their own holdfast. Some of those were even easily burned down by the Ironborn when they had arrived. In times like these, the small folk were all forced to fend for themselves or flee until a neighboring lord arrived. There were no clear places for them to take shelter at either without a sturdy keep and this left them completely exposed. It soon became clear that he would need to raise additional lords in the region. These lords could build castles and in turn small harbors could be constructed next to it. This would in time take care of the infrastructure problems, as those would need to be connected towards the other villages in the area. The added defenses of castles and a few ships in the petty harbors would also serve to deter smaller raids on the coasts. If all of this could be achieved, it might be able to keep a much larger population along the coast. How it looked now, he was surprised there were even still people living there. For centuries the area had been raided by the Ironborn. In the northern parts along the lands of the Mormonts and the mountain clans, The wildlings were even known to raid the coasts as well. The former had quieted down for a while with the coming of the Targaryens. However, at the first sign of weakness from the north or internal trouble in the kingdoms, the Ironborn had always restarted their century-old raids. This had depopulated much of the coastal areas. The Stony Shore had switched hands over a dozen times in its history, so much so that its people were whispered to have as much Ironborn as Northmen in their blood. If he could establish 2 or 3 petty harbors along the area, just bigger than the average fishing village, he might even be able to force some economic activity to take shape. This might in turn feed and sustain some more people in the long run. At first, he had been happy with this solution, but then he realized that his problems had only begun now. Who would he raise as lords? Where would he divide the lands? How would he compensate the de facto loss of influence for the Ryswells and Glovers? How would he create a new power balance with these new lords? He needed to create vassals that wouldn't become overpowered up-jump houses, as that could create resentment and even rebellion in the area. However, he couldn't make them pushovers either, as that would defeat their purpose from the start. Many hours he had spent over maps the last few days trying to answer these questions. He had decided that he would raise 2 new lordships. One encompassing the entirety of the Stony Shore, the other focused on Sea Dragon Point and including the area from there towards the former lordship. He had thought about splitting the latter lordship in 2 but decided against it as they would be too weak like that. It could become a problem in the future if the area got a sizable population, but that was still very far off. He hadn't thought about raising any nobles to the lordships, it was far too early for that. Many possible candidates might still die in battle, while newer candidates could still rise up in prominence during the upcoming campaigns. He would also have to think about the perception of houses Glover and Ryswell, and that was food for thought for another day. This left him with where to build the keeps. He vaguely encircled an area in the middle of the Stony Shore and on the west side of the point. The exact locations would be for the new lords to decide. Harbors and fishing villages would be constructed next to the keeps, while roads would connect those to each other and their neighbors in Deepwood Motte and Ryswell Hall. These roads would be both paid for and organized by House Stark. This left the only big issue, the population. Where would he get enough people from to give the area a kickstart? Especially after its recent devastation, this would be crucial. The recent destruction on the west side, combined with the devastation in the Wolfwood and along the Hornwood, made this very difficult. He at last came to the conclusion that people would need to be brought in from the Marndale, Bolton, Carstark, Dustin and Stark lands. The exact quantities would need to be calculated by Maestus, but he expected it to be in the thousands, maybe even tens of thousands combined with his next plans. As it stood now, he also had plans for Moat Cailin. His father had already wanted to restore the fortress and the area around it, but he had lacked the resources or the time. The former he had plenty of after his raids in the Westerlands, the latter he hoped would be a plenty after the war. He knew most of his father's plans for the region from memory, as he had helped implement them in Winterfell. He had already written to Lord Harley's that he would need to rebuild the inn and the stables on the north side of the fortress. These would be given back to the former owners, or if they were dead, to some of their relatives. The farming village that had just started to grow had been abandoned and would be restarted after the war. It wouldn't be alone though, as he would establish another 10 to 15 villages along with it. These villages would serve as an initial tax and labor base for the fortress. He knew it had been his father's intention to rebuild it, albeit smaller than it had historically been, and give it to Bran or Rickon. He would respect this wish and would start the reconstruction from the moment he came home. He had enough gold to fund the first stages of the operation, and hopefully the gathered labor force could bring about a boost in the local population. This, in combination with the construction of 2 small keeps on the western coast, would completely absorb his newfound riches, but it would be worth it. The north would be far better defended because of it. Hopefully the newly cultivated lands could drive some small population boosts in the area. These would generate a bigger tax revenue for both the local lords and House Stark. If so, that would in turn pay back his investments over a few generations. He wouldn't benefit from it, but House Stark and his descendants would. He felt tired, but really pleased with himself because of all the hard work he had done. A small voice in his head told him that everything he planned now would give him more time with his daughter in the years to come. He hoped from the bottom of his heart that this would be true. After having the feeling that he had done everything he could do about this issue for the moment, he shelved his calculations for later and went for a walk around the castle. After having spoken with some his men for the past hour, he was recalled to his solar by the local maester. It seemed more news had come in. He immediately called for his advisors, who had by now become something of a makeshift small council to him. He knew the group would need to be enlarged by the time the war was done, but the small group suited him for now. Once his extended family members, because that was really what this council was made up from, had gathered, he started reading his letters aloud. 2 more skirmishes between them and Talis' force had happened. The first smaller one had come to pass between 2 groups of outriders around Bria White to the south. His men had had to retreat after sustaining some casualties. The more important of the clashes had taken place between Harryon and his 200 men and approximately the same number under a knight named Sir Leo Blackbar. Harryon had managed to surprise the force between Sog's Horn and Antlers. Half the Reachman contingent had been captured or killed. Harry was bringing Sir Leo back to Harrenhal in shackles with him. The remainder of the Reachmen had retreated east towards Antlers. This taught him 2 things. First of all, from the first clash he realized the enemy was looking for possible ways into the riverlands to the south of the God's Eye. Secondly, the small battle taught him that Tali was still contesting his hold on the region without wanting to do battle. Although this suited him, he would be forced to do something soon. The major enemy army wasn't moving, and he couldn't stay passive here forever. He made a mental note to start organizing defenses at Lichester and Riverrun. If the Lannister were planning to encircle him at Harrenhal, he would need a safe place to retreat to. The following news was much more surprising. It seemed the mad boy King Joffrey had been murdered at his own wedding and that the Dornish were being blamed for it. The latter seemed to have fled the capital with Cersei accusing them of murder. Prince Oberyn had left with all his noble retinue, although half his spears had stayed behind in the capital. They had been slaughtered to the last man the very same day he left, all done on the orders of the Queen. A notable companion of the Martells was the young Lord Dane, who had helped his father against the Lannisters after King Robert's death. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Jon asked. The older men looked skeptically towards his brother. "No, I don't think it does. The Dornish troops were never going to join the Lannisters in the Riverlands, and Joffrey has an equally incestuous younger brother who can take his place on that damned chair." Sir Brynden stated matter-of-factly. "Yes, but the Tyrell alliance will fall apart, will it not?" Jon pushed once more. "Without the marriage and his daughter becoming queen, I don't see Mace Tyrell joining the Lannisters." "I'm not so sure, lad. The Tyrells have received much and more from their alliance to the Lannisters. Most likely they'll just betroth Margaery to Tommen and be done with it." Lord Rickard responded. "They might even like this. That boy Tommen sounds a lot more agreeable to a woman's influence than the mad dog that was Joffrey." "So, nothing has changed?" his brother asked, clearly annoyed. It was clear why. The information that he had perceived as good news, was actually not that consequential in the end. "Well, there are 2 important things. 1. The killer of your father is dead. It was Joffrey who ordered his death, not Tywin Lannister. The second is the breaking of the Martell and Lannister alliance, and most notably, the blood that was spilled during it. Dorne will not forget the death of their men. Most of the culprits would have been Reachmen if you look at the composition of the forces in the capital. The Dornish might be open to be persuaded to attack their century-old enemies because of this." His father-in-law explained, remarkably improving Jon's mood, before he turned dark. I almost forgot it was the little shit that killed father with those months of fighting Tywin Lannister. It's just sad that Ice couldn't take his head, but his mother and grandfather will do, I suppose." He responded grimly. Out of habit he looked towards the sword that ceremoniously hung behind his desk. He only carried the weapon in battle or specific training sessions. For daily use he had a much more practical arming sword. "Before this war is over, it will feel Cersei's neck. You can be sure of that." He responded, equally as grim. Every time he thought about what happened to father, his blood boiled. His wolf's blood, father would have called it. All men around the table nodded. All had loved his father and were keen to revenge him. After a few seconds, he calmed himself and went back to state business. Except for the letters, there is another issue I wanted your counsel on. We need allies. The recent break between the Lannisters and Martells could be a huge boon. My first instinct now is to send the Martells a letter about a possible alliance. If the Dornish attack the Reach in the rear, whilst the Florents and some of their minor allies are still in open rebellion, it could turn the Reach into a bloody battlefield and deprive the Lannisters of their support. It is a good idea, but what do we have to offer the Dornish? Their forces won't come out of their mountain passes for nothing. Lord Karstark implored. He smiled at his father-in-law. Revenge. Due to your actions we have killed Sir Amory Lorque, who, if the rumors are true, killed Princess Rhaenys. You also killed Sir Gregor Clegane in battle, who we all know raped Princess Elia and killed her son. His bones had been returned with the Lannister army, but they had to abandon them at the Battle of the Fords and are in our possession. I ask myself how they will react if we give them the bones of the killers of Princess Elia and her children and promise them the same for the instigator. The instigator? Jon asked. We promised them the head of Tywin Lannister. That should get them thinking. He responded. Now, both Lord Rickard and Sir Brynden smiled. That could work. The latter said. It's worth a shot. Everybody in favor? He asked and they all nodded. Good. Are there any other possible allies? They all looked at each other. Well, you have the Florents, as you mentioned, but I don't think they can offer any war-changing support. They are allied to both the Tarlis and the High Towers, but none of those seem to support them. His uncle said, and he had to agree with the assessment. What about Cracklaw Point? Jon asked. What about them? He responded. Well, all we know is that they refused the call to arms by the Lannisters. Most of those houses there fought under Rhaegar's banner at the Trident. They have no love for the Lannisters. Maybe we could get them on our side. We could promise them revenge for their Dragon Prince, as well as a lot of the bounty of the war for their impoverished lands. Jon explained. Before he could respond, Sir Brynden joined in. That could actually work, Your Grace. Another boon to us is the fact that those houses have been stalked by task collectors of the Celtigars ever since the coming of the dragon. Promise them independence from their taxes and they might flock to your banner. He picked up the map of the Northern Crown lands that was always present on his desk these days and looked at it. They were isolated and could take his enemies in the back at the right time. How many men can they field? Together. Some 2,000 to 3,000 I believe. However, their fighters are fierce. Many a friend I lost to their ilk on the banks of the Trident. The Blackfish responded sadly. So did I. Great Jon lost a cousin to one of them as well. Lord Karstark agreed. Won't that be cause for strife between our forces? He asked, not wanting resentment to seep into his army. No, I don't think so. All those men are dead now, as they went down with their prince. It has also been a generation since and it wasn't personal, they just fought for their dragons while we fought against them. The Blackfish explained. Good, then I'll make up a letter to send it to each of their houses. He summarized. I see there is one more letter that I have put aside for this meeting. He said, knowing full well the damning content it contained. He had received and read the letter only minutes before the meeting. He gave it to Jon to read and pass it through, as he started telling of its content. News has come from the Night's Watch that a massive wildling army is coming down on the wall. They speak of 30 to 40,000 warriors. It seems Lord Commander Mormont had gone behind the wall to scout out the rumors, but he never returned. His force was ambushed by the wildlings and only a few dozen returned to the wall. The Night's Watch lost many of its commanders, as well as over 250 men. It seems the institution is now weaker than it has ever been before. The arrival of our captives will help now that Moat Cailin is open, but the situation is dire. By now the army will be close to, if not already upon the wall. Our Ironborn prisoners may reach the wall in time, while the Bolton bastards' men have already sworn their oaths, but that won't be enough. The men we have been holding in the Riverlands and have scheduled to go north will never reach it in time. He summarized their predicament. 30,000 wildlings. Lord Rickard asked in shock. The Night's Watch won't be able to withstand that, not even without their recent losses. This could threaten all our lands. From his years at Carhold, he knew how important stability along the wall was for those houses. As such, they would have to move quickly. He nodded in understanding. How many men can Cregan still raise, Lord Carstark? His former foster father stroked his beard. 3, maybe 400 if he takes the Greybeards and Green Boys. I raised most of my men to come south with you. He nodded, in response, having expected this answer. What other troops do we have in the region? We have the mountain clans at Deepwood Motte. John said helpfully. Yes, good. That's almost 3,000 men. The Umbers should be able to raise the same as the Carstarks as well. That might be enough to help defend the wall. He responded hopefully. Lord Ricard nodded at that, but he added some more to the conversation. We could raise the clans on Skagos. If it is to defend the wall, they will come. There is only one thing they hate more than Southerners, and that's wildlings. Besides, if the wall falls, their lands will be prospected to many more raids than they already are. They won't take the risk. Can we trust the Skagasi? He asked with doubt in his voice. To obey your orders, no. To fight wildlings, yes. His father-in-law shrugged. My house has the most dealings with them, apart from the Umbers and the Night's Watch. Those people respect strength most of all. They didn't know you and were too far away, so they didn't march south. However, by now they will have heard of your exploits to the south. They will respect that, and because of this they will listen to your message. As I said, the thing that'll most likely take them over the edge will be their hatred of the wildlings and nothing else. He thought about it and looked at John and the Blackfish. Both shrugged, Lord Carstark having far more information about the Skagasi than they did. Fine, I'll make up the letter. That'll be all for now. His uncle and brother immediately made preparations to leave, but Lord Ricard still had some advice. When addressing the Skagasi, write to all the Magners as equals. They aren't by a long shot, but otherwise you will never get their respect. They are a proud people. They will follow you because of the strength of House Stark and your person, not because of your lineage. He looked deep into his mentor's eyes and nodded. He doubted the Skagasi would actually respond, but he had nothing to lose by doing so. I'll send the letters to the Skagasi. I'll send others to Deepwood Motte, and Moat Cailin. I propose you send the letter to Carhold yourself for maximum effect, Lord Ricard. I will ask the Great Yon to do the same for Last Hearth. His father-in-law nodded, bowed and left the room. The others directly behind him. Really? A wildling army? Was there no moment he could have any rest? Did he really need to fight a two-front war the whole time? Chapter 38, The Lion Makes Its Move. 300 AC. John. He smiled at the letter he had received from Arya. She was doing fine. It seemed she had completely healed from her wounds. Of course, she only mentioned this in passing, all she talked about were Nymeria's wounds. Her direwolf had also recovered well, however one big axe wound had left a scar at the underside of her belly. The scar was big enough that you could see it, as no hair grew back on the scar tissue. From the description that Alice had given Rob in her letters, everyone had expected the direwolf to be lame for the rest of her life. The fact that she wasn't was nothing short of a miracle, but it was no surprise his little sister looked at it differently. She had always been defiant and expected others to be like this as well. That she had banked on Nymeria to defy the odds was to be expected. He was happy his family was well. Most of the north seemed to have calmed down. Theon and his sister were in the captivity of the mountain clans and the Ironborn had all been thrown back. Still reason for concern remained. Messages about the wildling attack kept coming in. The fact that the wall was so far away and that the messages all went through Winterfell or Riverrun first, made all reports they received already old. Still, dire news kept coming in. Messages first confirmed the march of a very large wildling army. After that, messages for help from the Night's Watch came in. Yesterday, a message had flown in that had originally come from Last Hearth. It mentioned large numbers of wildlings at our side of the wall. Ever since then, the Lords of the North had been debating whether the wall had already fallen or not. It was a mess. The only thing that had brought back order was the fact the clans had already been asked to march 2 weeks ago. That fact, combined with the orders to last Hearth, Carhold and Skagos had calmed things down enough last night. Still, the lords were on edge. Especially because Tywine seemed to be finally thinking about moving. If anyone asked him, the old lion better move quickly. A common enemy in front of them would do wonders to unite the army. However, his brother didn't share this idea. He was afraid Tywine was going to march south of the God's Eye. For weeks our scouts there had been clashing with the enemy outriders and we had been steadily losing terrain lately. If they did so, the whole army could be surrounded between Tywine's force on one side and Talis' force on the other. Robb had already prepared for this. His brother had ensured him that the army would be able to leave in less than a day, if need be. Defenses had been built in strategic sites around Riverrun as well. He was disturbed in his thinking when he heard a knock on the door. He got up from his desk and opened the door. He had to look down to see his visitor, a small boy wearing the colors of House Dare. He vaguely remembered the Dare heir to be one of his brother's pages. "Lord Snow, the king asks for your presence in his solar," the boy told him, clearly out of breath. He nodded and went back inside his room. He picked up his sword belt and buckled it around his waist as he followed the page. As they were walking, he asked, "Did the king tell you why he has need of me?" "No, my lord, he has not. However, I have seen a great many ravens come in this morning and messengers as well. If I'd had to guess it would have to do something with that," the boy answered. "Thank you," he responded. Dark wings, dark words indeed. When he entered the solar, the usual group was already present. However, this time it was augmented with Harry on Karstark. Robb's brother-in-law had returned to them a few days ago, as Talis' probing attacks got too large and too vicious to his brother's taste. His brother acknowledged his presence and immediately went down to business. "Good, now that we're all here we can start. We have had a lot of news today. First off, we had some good news from the Vale. Our allies have managed to win a big victory at the Bloody Gate. Houses Redfort, Templeton, Hunter and Waynwood have left a token force to keep the Uri under siege while their main strength has marched against the Aegean and Urin force. They managed to score a crushing victory. Savardis Aegean was killed in the fighting. Most of the force was either killed or captured. This effectively ends the threat they posed in the middle of the Vale. Now only 3 threats remain, the Lindaleys and Corbrays to the north, the Sunderlands and smaller islands who are about to be engaged by the Mandaelis and the Graftons combined with Littlefinger's army in the south. Robb explained. "Any word from the first or last front?" Sir Brynden asked. "Not from the first, but we have had words from Lord Royce. His forces have had many small skirmishes with the force in Gulltown. Some went in his favor, some did not. All in all, the fighting is pretty indecisive. This is a good thing, considering how outnumbered the Royces are. With the enemy force in the center destroyed, Bronze Yone is expecting reinforcements from the victorious houses as they don't need those amounts of troops to siege the Uri. Hopefully, that can tip the scales to their favor." His brother responded. "Yes, but only if the Belmares and Coldwaters can keep the Lindaleys and Corbrays away from the Uri. I hope the Mandaelis act soon. Those 2 houses won't be able to withstand the forces of the Sunderlands as well," the Blackfish warned. He had to agree with that assessment. It was good they had decided to send the order 2 weeks ago. It might lift the Vale Knights' morale as well, knowing they would finally receive aid. The Vale might be getting other problems soon. News has come in that the Red Wine Fleet has left their harbors. They will be marching around to Dragonstone, to take care of the Baratheon problem for the Lannisters. If they succeed in doing so, the Lannisters and Tyrells could ferry whoever they want to the Vale. He looked around the room and everybody looked grim. He decided to speak up. "That will be many months from now. It will take the Red Wine Fleet a long time to make the trip around the continent. Maybe we get lucky and they get sucked into a storm under Storm's End. Even if that doesn't happen, they will have difficulty taking Dragonstone. Besides, every soldier they send over there is a soldier we don't have to fight here in the Riverlands." This message seemed to help. The Tyrells had manpower to spare, however they had taken losses. They could afford to send smaller armies, like the one under Lord Ashford in the Vale, away for now, but they couldn't keep doing that without lowering their advantage against them. He doubted Tully, Rowan or Tywin Lannister himself would allow another force to split off without winning a battle against them first. Jon's right. Is there any other news? Is there news about Tywin's army? Lord Rickard asked. Sadly, yes. However, before we get into that, I have another letter to discuss with you. It seems Euron Greyjoy has been crowned king in the Iron Isles. The Ironborn have chosen to pass over Balon's children and grant his crown to his brother instead. This newly crowned Iron King has also deemed to send us an answer to our former message, or that's what I expect to read. I haven't opened the letter yet. Robb told them. Well, no use in talking about it. Let's see that letter. The Blackfish almost ordered. He had a serious expression on his face. Of all those in attendance, he remembered Euron Greyjoy the best. He had fought in the Greyjoy Rebellion, and years of small raids on the Riverlands by the Greyjoy had done much as well. It also helped that the Riverlands were far closer to the Iron Isles than they were. Many more rumors found its way to their shores that way. From the stories he had been told about the man, who was nothing short of a pirate, he hoped that would stay like that. He didn't want to ever have to cross a man like that in his life. Sadly, he knew that life very seldom gave him what he wanted. Robb gave his uncle the letter and the man started reading aloud. To Robb Stark. I thank you for capturing my annoying nephew and willful niece. I decline your offer for peace in return for their safety. True Ironborn take what they want, if that would be the North so be it. If I would want the North, you will know it from the ravens sent to you that I took it. Regarding my brother's annoying spawn, they have failed in the simple tasks my brother gave them. As such, you can do with them whatever you wish. I have no need for them anymore. Euron Greyjoy, King of the Iron Isles. He looked around at the others to make sure he had heard that right. Judging by his brother's shocked expression, he had. He doesn't want them back. Robb exclaimed in shock. That's how it looks like, yes. The Blackfish responded. It's not that surprising if you think about it. Not surprising. They are his blood. His brother almost shouted in disbelief. Yes, but not every man loves his family. Euron was banished by Balon for raping their brother Victorion's wife. It's no small wonder he doesn't like to see the children of the brother that banished him. Besides that, they are claimants to his newly acquired throne. The son Theon has a lot more rights to sit there than his uncle Euron. He probably hopes that we'll get rid of his nephew for him, so he doesn't have to become a kinslayer to hold his crown. The Tully Knight explained. That actually sounded quite plausible. Still, it was a cruel way of thinking. If a man didn't even care for his own blood, what did he care for in the end? What do we do about this? Harry asked the question everyone had been thinking. After a few seconds of silence, the Blackfish spoke up. Not much, I think. He doesn't say that he actually wants the North, neither does he say the opposite. I think we should just protect and strengthen our borders like we have planned. If they come, we'll know. If that time comes, we'll act accordingly. Sir Brynden has the right of it. Lord Karstark agreed. Not much we can do about it now anyway. The Ironborn will get their due, but we have to defeat the lions and their pretty flowers first. What about the northern defense? With the clans on their way to the wall, doesn't that expose the north? He asked. Not really, no. Lord Rickard replied. The Ryswells and Dustins have been strengthening their defenses for weeks. Lord Harley's is still taking care of Moat Cailin and the clans have left a strong guard at Deepwood Motte. If the Ironborn attack now, we won't have a response force near, that's true, but they'll still find most of the north better prepared than the first time. All they'll be able to do undisturbed is raid the Stony Shore again, but there won't be anything to raid as they already burned almost the whole area to the ground. All of them had to begrudgingly agree with that. They decided to keep a close eye on this Euron Greyjoy, as they couldn't do much more for now. Now then, the really bad news. The real reason I all called you here so suddenly. An hour ago, a message came to me that Tywin Lannister, Mace Tyrell and Mathis Rowan have been spotted at the head of an army 45,000 men strong. They seem to be marching along the Blackwater and have made quite some progress without being detected. Their most likely target if they continue like that is the Stony September, however I don't believe any of that. Rob started talking about the Lannister army. Most likely, they'll deviate from their course in a day or two and march up towards us. Another possibility is that they follow the Blackwater's tributary to the Rushing Falls and move on to Lichester from there. That way, they could cut us off from our supplies and a possible retreat. If we allow them to do so, we will be betting everything on a battle in which we are surrounded and outnumbered, not something I'm willing to do. His brother finished his assessment of the situation. Where exactly was the army spotted? Brynden Tully asked. Along the Blackwater Rush, some 60 miles west of the God's Eye River, came the response. That's almost 10 days marching from King's Landing. How the hell did they conceal that? The Blackfish responded in shock. There have been signs. Scouts disappearing mostly. That's why I ordered you to send new and bigger groups that way. Well, my instinct was right. The whole army is there, the capital has emptied. Rob replied. What can we do now? Lord Karstark interrupted them, always practical. There are signs that Tully is preparing to march. I think that the safest bet for us is to retreat to Lichester. The army could start moving by tomorrow if we wanted them to. I have already fortified the area. From there we can better fight the enemies. We can even retreat all the way to Riverrun if we have to. The plan was explained. Most were in agreement. He himself, however, still had doubts. Wouldn't we give the Lannister army the possibility to reunite with Tully's force then? Yes, but they'll never be able to sustain that large an army in the Riverlands. This isn't the Reach, John. They'll learn that soon enough. Besides, the region has been raided already and our army will already have moved through those parts. No way they can sustain 65 to 70,000 men together. Those 45,000 might already be a stretch, although I believe they are organizing food transports with barges up the Blackwater and across from the Reach. At least, that's what I would do. The further they march into our lands, the harder that'll be to sustain. Might be fun to raid those supply lines actually, now that I think about it. The famous Tully Knight countered. He had to agree. The only reason why their own supply chain went reasonably smoothly was the amount of cattle they had raided from the west. They moved parts of those herds to Harrenhal at a steady pace to augment their rations. The enemy wouldn't be able to do that so easily at such a long distance in enemy territory. He nodded, while Rob looked lost in thought with his gaze all across the maps of the southern Riverlands. After a while he spoke his thought. Uncle, would you be willing to do as you proposed? To raid the Lannister force, just like you did a year ago before we arrived? You mean for me to go out there and raid their supply lines? Sir Brynden asked. Yes, but not only those. You could attack their supply lines, garrisons, rearguards, parts of their camp at night. Just do whatever you can to harass them. You might be able to coerce them into splitting their forces. Even if that doesn't work, the delay will allow us to better prepare for their arrival when the battle comes. You are by far the best man alive to accomplish such an endeavor. His brother explained his idea. I could do something like that, yes. However, it depends on how many men I'll be able to field. If I have too few, I won't be able to do significant damage. If I have too many, I might be too slow to escape their counterattacks. They should all have horses and be lightly packed as well. The older knight mused. How many do you want? Rob responded with a gesture of his hand. Just like that? The Blackfish asked. Just like that. You are by far my most experienced commander and you know best in this situation. Ask whatever you want, you shall have it. His brother said without a doubt in his voice. It was clear that he meant every word of it. I must say, grandnephews are a lot easier to deal with than nephews. Sir Brynden grinned. He looked over the maps for a while and counted up the numbers in his head. 800 men should do it. All light cavalry and outriders, and those mounted archers from the north that the Bolton fellow boasts so much about. All should have fresh horses when they depart and enough food, hay and water to sustain themselves for 2 weeks. The rest I'll get them to forage or raid. Rob didn't even blink, he just agreed to it. Good, I want you gone by noon tomorrow. Now Lord Ricard, I'll have you lead the rearguard of the army. Chances are that you'll only be able to leave the day after tomorrow. I expect you to make sure that nothing in Harrenhal will be useful to Tali. We don't give handouts to our enemies. The old lord simply nodded. I'll have the marching order ready by the evening. It'll just be the same as the one we used to come here. The riverlords that only joined us here will be placed in between at my will. None had a problem with that. With my uncle gone, Lord Galbart will have command of the Outriders. I'll give the vanguard to Lord Blackwood. The main column I will lead myself. Lastly, the baggage train will be organized by Lord Mallister. I expect you to give the orders to the men to start packing immediately. I'll gather the lords tonight and explain them everything. Any more questions? His brother fired off. In the blink of an eye, he had gone into his role of a war leader. In that moment you could see why he had won all his battles until now. Rob had been hovering over maps for weeks on end. He had looked at suitable terrain to do battle on, had organized and reorganized supply routes and had crunched troop numbers in his head. Now that it was time to decide, he could do so in the blink of an eye. Everybody that would look closely at those decisions would tell you they were sound. That's why they all followed him. All of the commanders agreed and stormed out to do their orders. He knew without the command that he was in charge of readying the personal Levi of House Stark. As such, he left the meeting and marched for their barracks immediately. The waiting was over, battle would soon be upon them. A week later. Rob. The rearguard of the army had just arrived at the castle. 32,000 men under his command were now gathered in and around Leicester. The heir of the castle, the son of one of old Lord Leicester's cousins, had been with the army the whole time. Initially, he had planned to make his defensive stand here, although it soon became clear that the site wasn't as ideal as it looked on the maps. The discussions with the members of House Leicester allowed him to send messengers early to pack up the prepared supplies and defenses. By the time they arrived, the unnecessary supplies were already on their way back to Riverrun. The only thing that remained was a well-prepared and defensible camp. He had chosen to remain here for a day to let his army rest. Most of his recent scout reports mentioned recent delays in the Lannisters' march. No doubt his uncle had something to do with that. The delays meant that he could rest his men and form a better defensive backup plan. However, it also had its downsides. News had just come in this morning of the capture of Harrenhal by Randil Tali. They had evacuated all their men from there, so the capture in itself wasn't that decisive. The bigger problem was that lords from that area became very anxious about their own holdings. Most notable among those were Lords D'Ari and Root. They joined together with houses Leicester, Smallwood, Vance and Piper in complaining about the campaign. He would much rather protect all their lands, but it just wasn't possible. The land had no natural defensive barriers. Besides that, the enemy's numbers were far too big for them to allow themselves to be pincered between their forces. It had been a headache to convince those lords of his scorched earth policy. Almost every day they came to him with the same complaints. Afterwards they left, and just as he thought he had managed to convince them, they came back the next day. The only thing that had managed to lessen the complaints had been his order for their families to evacuate towards Riverrun. A man could give up much of his gold and lands, if he knew his children were safe, it seemed. Another benefit of resting here was that he could receive and respond to messages. A rider from Riverrun had come with very important messages from the north. It seemed the rumors were true. The wildlings had broken through the wall at Castle Black. The Night's Watch had been completely destroyed in the area. However, disagreements between the different clans had led to only half of the force making it to the other side, before his force showed up. The mountain clans had joined up together with the Umbers and delivered a lightning-quick attack on the unsuspecting enemy. The letter he had received came from the Great Yon's uncles. A great battle had ensued at Mole's Town. Big parts of the enemy army had been ambushed there. Their disorganized foe had been no match for the northern cavalry charges, followed up by disciplined northern footmen. Hother Umber estimated the enemy casualties to be around 3,000 death. On top of that, a few hundred had been taken captive. More significantly, half the Wilderling force had been scattered. The northern cavalry had chased the largest parts back to Castle Black. There, they fled back north of the wall by the thousands. The letter mentioned some 2,000 wildlings still scattered around the gift in 3 different groups. However, in the same message the men asked for help. They still had some 30,000 wildling warriors right outside of the wall. That army would attack again, once they had reformed. Their leader Mance Rayder had managed to survive the battle and was in the process of reuniting his force. Pincered between this enormous force just outside of the wall and 2,000 of them on the other side, the force was hard-pressed for manpower. They couldn't effectively man the wall, especially after the gate's defenses were destroyed, and deal with the roaming bands. He was thankful that some of the other messages brought good news from that front. Alaric Karstark had left Karhold with 300 men, mostly green boys, to reinforce the wall. Although that would surely help, it wouldn't be enough. All of the northern nobles, himself included, were anxiously awaiting the reply from the Skagasi. He knew it was far too early for them to have replied to his letter, let alone act on it, and raise their men. However, he hoped for their confirmation of his orders anyway, as their thousands of men could make the difference in holding the wall. For now, there wasn't much he could do on that front. All the northernmost houses were already alerted and in the fight. The other houses couldn't send troops, as their reserves were all busy. The stupidest thing he could do was rush his forces north, only for them to leave the western coast undefended for the Ironborn to return and take them. The Mandaeli, Flint and Lock host was also needed to turn the tide in the Vale. The only other possibility was for him to order Robert Glover and his 2,000 men north. Still, this march would take weeks and it would cost him his reinforcements here. He knew he would need all the troops he could get for the upcoming battles. Either to fight in the clash against the Lannisters or to reinforce his army between that fight and the one with Tarly afterwards. That was what he was most scared of. He knew he could defeat Tywin Lannister, even with his numerical advantage. What bothered him was if he could do it and have enough strength left to face Randil Tarly's force. It would do him no good to defeat Tywin and Mace Tyrell only for his army to be destroyed after that. He needed to win all of those battles, or more specifically, he couldn't lose any. An undecisive battle resulting in retreat could be very bad, but if his army was destroyed it would be devastating. While his troops rested and his commanders went over the marching orders, troop discipline and supply lines, he was bent over maps for the whole day. He looked at the possible movements the Lannisters could take and possible battlefields for them to hold them off on. Riverrun would be his main base of operations, but the lands around it weren't well suited for his army to fight upon. The Kingslayer had more than proven that when he had smashed Uncle Edmure's force outside of it. For the moment, he favored the lands around Atlanta for a decisive clash. Not only would its little creeks help hinder the enemy's heavy cavalry, its slight hills could give his archers the edge they needed. It wasn't too far away from Riverrun either, maybe 2 or 3 days marching at most. Luring the enemy there shouldn't be a problem, although it would mean giving up on the Stony September, Pink Maiden, Wayfarer's Rest, Acorn Hall and Leicester and a dozen more smaller keeps. The lords of these castles would give him another headache to be sure, but it has to be done. He still looked at other sites for the coming battle but found none that would protect his eastern flank enough to be able to hold Tarly off from attacking him in the side. He sighed and sat down in the lord's chair. He closed his eyes and tried to pull on the feeling at the back of his mind, just as Jon had explained to him. For a moment, nothing happened. Suddenly, his eyes were open. He was in the middle of a forested area. By habit, he raised his snout and sniffed. Wait, he sniffed. He had no time to think more about that, as he picked up the smell of a deer not far to the east. His legs moved on its own, as he raced after the smell. Less than a minute later, he saw a clearing up ahead. A herd of deer was there, drinking water from a small creek. He charged out into the clearing and onto the herd. It immediately scattered and he soon found the weak link of the group. A young deer, clearly slower than the rest, was fleeing up north and he chased after it. He snapped at its hind legs twice, before finally bringing it down a while later with a bite that wrapped around its right limb. Both of them rolled around in the dirt, but he soon jumped up again. The wounded deer tried to escape, but it was no use. He ran over towards it and tore out its throat. As his prey was now dead, he looked around to see if he had any competitors for the meat. The only ones he would ever share his food with were his packmates, and only his silent brother was close to him. However, he hadn't joined on the hunt, he had chosen to stay with his two-legger today. After making sure that he was alone, he slowly walked over to his dead prey. He opened his maw and tore out a big piece of its belly. The taste of fresh flesh and warm blood filled his throat and he reveled in it. Wait, what? What was he doing? He didn't enjoy drinking blood. Where was he? Suddenly he stopped eating, as he realized he was inside Grey Wind. For a moment, it seemed they battled for control until his direwolf bowed down to his will. He was in the mind of his companion and had full control. This was what John had tried to teach him all this time. He tested his theory and forced the direwolf to walk back a few steps from its prey. He felt Grey's instincts fight back, as he wanted to enjoy the fresh meat. He could also feel the direwolf's stomach, he was clearly hungry. Still he forced his companion's mind back. He let him do circles and had him jump in the air, all of it worked although he got resistance from time to time. He was overtaken with joy, so much so that he hadn't noticed the flock of birds flying above him. Surprised at their presence, he lost control and Grey Wind immediately ran back to the corpse. The moment he tore off another piece of flesh, the smell and taste of the deer's blood was enough to send him back to his own body. He didn't mind, Grey deserved the reward for his hunt. Still, he had been in total control for a moment there. He tapped his fingers on the wood of the desk, as a growing smile crept on his face. He still tasted the iron of the deer's blood on his tongue. He could remember how the forest looked and where the clearing was. The thought that this memory was clearer than if he would have been there in human form, even crossed his mind. Only now, he realized the full range of possibilities this gave him. He had to keep working on his control to do anything useful with it for a prolonged time, but that didn't matter. If needed, he could have John do the tasks for him. His brother had built up far better control of Ghost than he had with Grey. He looked out of the window and grinned. Visions of night attacks, ambushes and even assassinations in the middle of battle rushed into his head. He might just have found a way to make Tywin's life far more miserable and he absolutely loved it. Chapter 39, Battle of Acorn Hall. 300 AC. Rob. It was late in the morning, but he had already been up for quite some time. Even though he had had the luxury of a bed in the castle of Stonehenge, he hadn't slept well. The worries for the upcoming battles were hindering his sleep. His army was outnumbered, which was not entirely new to him. What was new, was that, for the first time since the battle in the Whispering Wood, he felt that he might be outmatched. Tali could possibly the one commander he wouldn't be able to defeat, he worried. However, the fresh morning air had done him well. These parts of the Riverlands looked almost peaceful in the morning. The lands around the castle had been devastated by the Lannisters many months ago, but nature was replenishing itself. The castle itself stood strong and defiant. In his mind, he thanked the Blackfish for saving it from ever falling into their enemies' hands. Now, he was in the middle of the campgrounds. He had spent an hour talking to the troops and carefully studying their morale. Now, he stood in a tent in the center of the encampment. He had decided to hear grievances from his soldiers and lower nobles today. He did his best to unify the force like this, although it wasn't made easy. He had to stop himself from sighing when he heard another dispute between two lower nobles over the possible theft of arrows, boots or hay. Still, he soldiered on and brought justice and calm back to even these small divisions in the force. He noticed how the Northmen quite easily accepted his judgment, except for maybe that one time with the White Hills. A lot of Riverlanders were harder to convince. It was noticeable how his authority was questioned more whenever they were part of the conflict. In some way, this was to be expected. The Riverlanders had always been a quarrelsome people who had problems with established authority. Over a dozen dynasties had ruled these lands, none survived to this day. Even the mighty Targaryens had had problems with them. Every war, be it the Blackfyre Rebellion, Faith Uprising or the Dance of Dragons, had seen fighting among the Riverlords. He would try to end this, but it wouldn't be easy. He would need to show them he was their king now and they had to obey. Ironically, one of the things that played most in his favor was his Tully coloring. Where a lot of the Northmen had hesitated because of his looks, some Riverlords accepted the young hoster Tully come again much easier. Not all lords were as quarrelsome either. The Blackwoods, Malisters and Deadings obeyed him much quicker than the others. He saw this as a positive sign, especially from the latter two. Both of those houses were some of those that had followed him either the longest or the furthest west on his campaigns. They had gotten to know him the best. If he could get the other riverlords to know him like this, maybe he could instill the same trust in them as well. However, this would take time. For now, he was stuck dealing with their petty issues. He prepared himself for the story of a captain wearing the colors of House Irenford when a messenger stormed into the tent. The man wore Tully colors and was clearly exhausted but pushed on. His guards stopped him in his tracks, but the man just shouted in response. A message for the king from Sir Brynden Tully. He stood up from his chair and told his guards to let the man pass. The man waggled towards him, until he fell to his knees from exhaustion. Get that man a chair and some food and water. He shouted to no one in particular. Soon servants brought a chair and 2 guards raised him into it. Not much later, a wineskin and some salted beef was brought up. The messenger took a few bites from the beef and swallowed it down with the wine, before looking up to him. I thank you, your grace. I was sent to bring you an important message from Sir Brynden Tully. He nodded encouragingly. Where is the letter, good man? He didn't dare risk it being written down. I was to tell you his words. If I was captured, I was ordered to kill myself before they could torture me. I was to only tell you and your most trusted advisors, your grace. The man spoke out. This caused a lot of commotion in the tent. He just raised his hand and most of it died down. All of you, out. I will resume this where it left off after I have dealt with this. He said to everyone in the room. Most men left the tent, only the nobles of his personal guard being allowed to stay. What is your name, soldier? I'm called Oliver, your grace. The man replied and he nodded in response to that. Please, tell me your message now, Oliver. He said in an authoritative, but gentle tone to the soldier in the chair. He orders me to tell you that his mission is going well. He has already taken out 2 supply convoys of the Tyrells, one with food and the other with siege equipment and army supplies. He has managed to surprise attack a portion of the enemy rear as well. One Lord Keedwell and his troops lagged behind and were ambushed. The Lord and half his men were dead before any reinforcements could come in. Once they did, we retreated back quickly. The Tully man started his story. In response, a combined force of Selwards and Reachmen was sent after us. This force is led by Lord Virewill. It has quite successfully managed to screen our force away from the enemy host, although it hasn't been able to force Sir Brynden into an engagement. He fears he won't be able to do much more in his current task and asks permission to return to the main army. The message continued. He nodded at this. If his uncle thought this the most prudent, he would allow it. He could make good use of both him and the men accompanying him. He understood why the Blackfish wouldn't want this information to fall into enemy hands, but this still wouldn't warrant this kind of secrecy and speed. Thank you, good man. There will be a bed waity. He started to say, but he was quickly interrupted. I thank you for your hospitality, your grace, but that was not the whole message I came to deliver. After Lord Virewill split off from the column, the enemy thought our outriders couldn't reach them anymore. However, Sir Brynden had carefully sent a group of scouts around to keep an eye on them. The force split in 3, a few days after it left its path next to the Blackwater. As expected, they did this to ease the strains on their supply chains and to cover a bigger area for raiding and foraging. Oliver said, as he looked up to him from the chair. The most western force, carrying the Lannister banner, marches on Pink Maiden. The central force, with the banners of House Rowan and Tyrell alongside one another, was seen on the road to Wayfarer's Rest. The last one, showing the Tyrell Rose above all others, has been seen on the way to Acorn Hall. The soldier explained without stopping. It was my job to inspect the last host and bring a message to you if Sir Tully's guess proved correct. He told me to counsel you to attack the eastern host as soon as possible, but only if the army was led by Mace Tyrell. It is, your grace. I have looked at its fires and seen its march order. The Tyrell Lord's wheelhouse could be seen from far away. His young son could be seen leading at the front of the column as well. I had clear orders to give you their troop numbers and tell you of their weak links in command and urge you to make use of it, your grace. The man explained his uncle's audacious plan. The Blackfish wants us to ambush the Tyrells now. Smalljan boomed in response. Yes, my lord, he does. The soldier agreed. He stayed quiet, while his trusted friends and guards started bickering amongst themselves. Without a word, Torren walked over to him and whispered in his ear. How are we sure we can trust this guard, Robb? What if this is another of Tywin's plots? This got him thinking. He wouldn't put it past the Lannister lord to try something like this, but it also sounded like his uncle. He decided to put the messenger to the test. How do I know you're not sent here by the Lannisters to run me into an ambush myself? Your uncle expected this question, your grace. He ordered me to tell you his first words to you in the Riverlands. When he first saw you, at the head of your army, he said, "Good to see you finally chose to show up, nephew, you took your time all right," or so he told me. He snickered at that. His uncle had indeed greeted him that way. He still saw the man's smile on his face when he looked at him and the cavalry army he had brought to save his home. He nodded to Torren, indicating that he was no spy. Tell me more about the Tyrell army. What are their numbers? What's their army composition? How is their marching order? Which lords accompany Mace Tyrell? He fired off his questions, one after the other. These were the same questions I was ordered to expect, your grace. Oliver happily responded, clearly proud that he would be able to help the war in such a significant way. He pulled out a paper from his chest pocket, with what he assumed were notes on it. The force numbers around 15,000 men, give or take. Except for the Tyrell Rose, there were many banners that I could see. There were silver caltrops on a black field, grapes on a blue field, flaming arrows on a dark blue field, an animal skull on a red field, a tower on a grey field, 6 yellow circles on a blue field, and lastly a field of black and yellow stripes with 3 yellow things in the middle, but I couldn't see what they were. The man read from his list. That's all of them? He asked. Yes, all that I could see. There could be others that I haven't seen, I don't know. There were also dozens of smaller ones, but I was told to ignore those. The Tully soldier replied. He nodded, that had been good advice. Who knows, otherwise they would have gotten a list banners describing sworn swords and barely landed knights. He thought about the crests himself. Of course, Tyrell, but he also recognized House Hightower and House Redwine in there. He couldn't think of the names of the other ones. He looked at his friends. Did anyone get them all? Sir Kurth Vance, the youngest son of the Lord of Atranta, stepped forward. My mother was from the Reach, your grace. I served as a page for my uncle, Lord Mullador, for a while. As such I got all but one. In order they were House Footley, House Redwine, House Norwich, House Bulwer, House Hightower and House Huey. The last one I don't know for sure, but I would guess it to be House Beesbury. They are also vassals of the Hightowers, like the Hueys and Bulwers, and they match the description, 3 yellow beehives on a black and yellow striped field. Thank you, Sir Kurth. So which nobles do we have there with Mace Tyrell? Who will be on his council? He continued his questions. Lord Paxter Redwine will be there, no main Hightowers were said to be part of the force, so maybe only a distant cousin or something from them. Sir Patrick Mallister responded. Lord Footley is too old, his son and heir will lead his troops there. Not too bright a lad, if you ask me. Sir Lucas Blackwood joined in. Sir Wendell Mandaily spoke next. My father spoke to me of the death of Lord Bulwer 2 years ago. If I remember correctly, the new head of the house is a young girl. No Bulwers then, any others we know of. He kept the conversation going. Sir Kurth spoke up once more. Lord Brunston Huey will more than likely lead his own forces, your grace. If I would have to guess about House Beesbury, I would guess Sir Bertram. The man is a much more capable fighter than his fat lordly brother. I wouldn't know who leads House Norwich. Do you know anything more about those 2 men? He asked the young knight. Lord Brunston is a jovial man, but not too bright when it comes to warfare. He was one of the foremost supporters of Lord Mace's siege of Storm's End during the rebellion. Sir Bertram is a capable fighter, but he is a natural follower. He always follows his elder brother or the Hightowers everywhere. The young Vance explained. Good, That means the only men Mace Tyrell had around him were Lord Redwine and some yes-men. There could always be a very capable cousin in one of the houses, but the odds of that were low. The odds of Mace Tyrell listening to a second-rank noble of a second-rank house were even lower, if the stories he heard about the man were true. Any more information about the army? He asked the messenger. Just parts of their marching order, Your Grace. The Tyrell son leads at the front, he is accompanied by the Beesbury and Hightower banners there. The Redwine and Footley banners were more in the middle with Lord Tyrell's wheelhouse. The others I don't know about, I just saw them when they were encamped. Oliver replied. He quickly noticed how the man had listened to his nobles and put the right houses and banners together himself in his explanation. A capable and intelligent man, he might have more use for him. Did you have any problems on your mission? Yes, Your Grace. I was once confronted by a lonely scout riding out, but I managed to defeat him and hide the body. I got this cut as a souvenir. The man pointed to a wound on his left arm, as he told his story. Whilst sneaking around the hills surrounding their camp, I took out another guard that was asleep. Further than that, I encountered no enemies. Great job, Sir Brynden will be more than proud. I will have a bed in the barracks of the keep made ready for you for tonight. After Sir Brynden rejoins the army, I ask you to come to an audience with us. You will receive a fitting reward then. Thank you, Your Grace. The man responded, as he got out of his seat. He bowed low and left the tent right after. Sir Patrick and Sir Wendell, could you do me the favor of accompanying me back to the keep? I would ask the rest of you to gather all of the lords in the great hall of the castle. I will join them soon. What about the petitioners? Asked. Send them away, I'm done with this for the day. He replied at once. After that, they quickly left and looked at the maps of the areas around Acorn Hall. The castle wouldn't stand a chance against the Tyrell host, but the territory around it looked suitable enough for an ambush. He got the same response from lords in the area. It was a shame Lord Theomar was holding the Golden Tooth with his liege Lord Carl Vance. Still, enough others knew the area. In what might have been his shortest war council, he made his decision. He would follow his uncle's advice and try to break the Tyrells on the field. His lords looked at him in surprise when he finished the meeting without letting them all have their say. That surprise turned into shock however, when they heard of his plan. He didn't leave any room to contest his plans and send them on their way to prepare. He would ride forth with all of his cavalry. As they were constantly on the march, it would be a lot easier to prepare them for a quick detour. He hoped most would be ready by the early afternoon. That way, they could still accomplish a decent march today. He knew he had around 8,000 horse left in his army. His uncle had taken 800 away. 8,000 would have to do. The element of surprise could easily counter their numerical inferiority. He ordered John to prepare the household cavalry, while he himself found a few pack horses. With him, he would bring maps, scout reports and the troop strengths of each of his lords. This would aid him when he had to make up his actual battle plan. He patted the flank of the last pack horse and took a deep breath. Battle would be soon upon us, he thought as he looked over the courtyard. 4 days later. They were waiting behind the thin tree line, about 1.5 miles north of Acorn Hall. The trees hid their presence for now, but they couldn't wait here forever. Still, they couldn't attack just yet. John first had to do the task he had been given. His brother had secluded himself somewhere in the forest. He was left alone, with only a perimeter of guards around him at a considerable distance. For the task he had been given, he couldn't be himself. He needed to be Ghost. After waiting for a while, a white direwolf suddenly appeared beside him. It hadn't made sound and still managed to frighten a lot of his troops because of it. Owen Nuri clearly muttering that that beast wasn't normal somewhere further along the line. Ghost looked at him and waited for him, he gave him the slightest of nods. He knew he was signaling to his brother when he looked into the eyes and he let out a sigh he didn't knew he was holding. He looked to his side to his own companion. Grey, follow Ghost. He said quietly. The beast only looked at him in return. However, when Ghost slowly started walking beyond the tree line, he followed his brother. Many of his lords hadn't believed he could pull off his plan. He would sneak the direwolves into the enemy camp, kill the guards and scare the enemy horses. At the same time, a small group of archers would fire at the tents on the south side of the encampment. The plan was that this would drive the enemy on the plain closer towards them. Then, they would attack from both the north and the east side, obliterating much of the confused enemy in front of its camp. Afterwards, there would probably have to be a bloody fight over the remainder of the encampment, but with some luck they would be able to break the chain of command with the chaos in the camp and the slaughter outside of it. He had managed to convince his lords, using their newly found anger to his benefit. Yesterday, his army had passed High Heart and his northern lords had almost exploded. Most knew of the place, but rarely anyone had seen it before. Seeing the holy place and the 31 weirwood tree stumps, angered even the most patient of his lords. To many of them, especially the young and brash, the enemy in front of them was nothing less than the recoming of the Andals. This was completely ridiculous, of course, as parts of his own force were of Andal descent. Many men in his army fought under the banners of Vance, Vipren and other Andal houses. Besides, all of the Riverlords had Andal blood in their veins after thousands of years of intermarriage. Still, it worked into his favor. The Andal flowers of House Tyrell made the blood of many of his men boil, and that was exactly what he needed. He didn't care if they revenged some distant memory of thousands of years back when they fought, as long as they did fight. He looked around the men and took a deep breath. He was surrounded by 5,000 cavalrymen from all across his kingdoms. They looked ready, for which he was glad. He had split his forces to better strike at the enemy. The biggest part would attack from the north side under his own command, while a second force of 3,000 horse would attack from the east under the Great Yon. Together they could pincer the enemy force and deny it the possibility of raising an effective shield wall against their charges. He looked to his side and saw Todd dutifully standing next him. Harry wasn't there, as he would be leading his left flank. He had missed the presence of his father-in-law, as he had given him command of the foot with the task of getting them to Riverrun safely. He stood there, waiting, for what felt like an eternity. The whole army sat silently on top of their horses, as if frozen in time. In truth it couldn't have been more than a couple of minutes, but that was not how it felt. The calm before the storm, his father had always described it to him. The moment where every man comes to the realization this might be his last battle. His father had told him it was there that you really got to know a man. You had the ones who reveled in it, like his friend the former King Robert. You had those who felt afraid and were shaking from it, trying to pray to whomever would listen to allow them to survive the fight. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old, but he would never forget his father's answer when he had asked him which of those he was. Neither he had replied. I never really enjoyed it, although I was always good at fighting. Not as good as the king, mind you, but I can handle my own. I never turned away from battle either. A Stark doesn't go into battle because he likes it, or he doesn't want to look like a coward. A Stark fights because it is his duty. I have a duty to my family, to the north, to its people and to my king. You will have the same duty one day, Rob. I really hope you'll never have to go to war, but if you do, don't be afraid. Don't revel in it either. Most of those men opposite you are just fighting for their people and families as well, just like you. Just do your duty and try to get home, that's all a man can ever do in war. He was planning on doing his duty. He would protect his family and make sure they were never threatened like this again. He would do his duty to the north and give it its long-awaited independence. He would do his duty to his people, both in the north and the Riverlands, and try to make sure that they have better lives than the ones the Lannisters would ever allow them to have. Lastly, he would do his duty as a son and avenge his father. He would break the Lannister allies one by one until only Tywin Lannister remained. After that no one would ever speak that name in fear again, he would make sure of that. Then he felt a pull at the back of his head and closed his eyes for a moment. He was in an army camp and the chaos around him confused him. Horses were running amok by the hundreds. He saw them trample both big and small two-footers alike. He heard screaming, and in the distance, he saw fire. All his instincts told him to run, but his white brother stopped him. He saw him bite out the throat of a foolish two-footer who had ran at them with a pointy stick. He saw another one who was trying to shoot smaller sticks at his packmate and instinctively charged him. The two-legger in green never saw him coming. green or red, it didn't matter, their necks snapped the same way. Suddenly his white brother stalked over to him and put his paw on his face. What an odd thing to do, he thought. When he didn't react, his brother did it again and again until suddenly he remembered something. He was supposed to howl to warn his two-legger. He raised his head and a piercing howl left his throat. After he stopped, he suddenly saw his packmate charge him, and as he crashed into him, he was back into his own body. John probably knew he would have difficulty getting back on his own. He looked around and saw how everybody was waiting for his signal. Today, we will show the Tyrells why they shouldn't have allied with the Lannisters and their incestuous family. We will chase these Reachmen all the way back to Highgarden, never to return to these lands. He shouted. Now, we ride. He put his heels in the flanks of his horse and he shot forward. Soon thousands of men did the same as they thundered after him. They crested a hill and rode to the top of the following one. What he saw there was better than he would have dared to dream. He saw a big army encampment to the south of Acorn Hall. It was surrounded by a palisade, but otherwise lightly defended. The southern tip of the camp was in flames and the fire seemed to be spreading. He saw around 100 cavalrymen charge into the woods, probably to go after his archers. He knew they would never reach them, as the Great Yon would soon emerge from there. On the field below, hundreds if not thousands of men had gathered. Some had just fled the chaos in the camp, others were actively trying to recapture the escaped horses. Most of the men were only dressed in light armor and only carried the weapons on their hip. Few shields or spears could be seen, which would be a joy for his cavalry. In a few places, he could see nobles trying to bring order to the men on the field with mixed results. If they struck now, it would be a slaughter. He looked around to To and some of his soldiers. We charge. Anyone who brings me Mace Tyrell, or his flowery son, will receive his weight in silver. He screamed at the top of his lungs and the men cheered, hoping for wealth and glory as all charged down the hill in a sea of men and horses. Their charge was accompanied by the sound of his northern war horns. He saw a noble in a dark blue tabard shouting at the men to form up right in front of him. To his surprise, over 100 actually did so without fleeing. In the end it didn't matter. Few hosted spears or even shields and they just ran right over them, his sword first getting red in the process. He saw the Lord disappear under Daisy Mormont's horse, after he had been hit by Sir Donal Locke's lance. The reclawed soldiers fared no better and quickly he found himself on the open plain, chaos all around them. He kept charging on, cleaving a man's hand off on his left and opening the shoulder of a soldier in Tyrell colors on his right. Now, he could hear a second blast of northern war horns. A sound he had learned to love and cherish, especially now as thousands of horses appeared from the east. In minutes, he had crossed the whole plain and he found himself at the gates of the enemy camp. He looked around him and saw that the fields were overrun by his cavalry. As such, he didn't hesitate and ordered the men around him to directly charge in the camp. Hundreds either obeyed the command, or just followed the stream of horses as his men started pouring into the encampment. To had told him to wait for a few dozen of his men to pass, before he and his guard also rode inside. Inside the camp, chaos still reigned. He saw flattened tents and spread out bodies. No way his men could have done this. This was Grey and Ghost's work. Well, them and the thousands of horses they had managed to scare off in all directions. The chaos the horses had made in the camp was amazing, but the best thing about it was that the Reachmen couldn't use their cavalry. His men charged in and soon dispersed all around the camp. He and his guard with dozens of others rode towards the flames on the south side, killing all in their way. Soon they were joined by even more riders, among them he recognized some of the banners that been in the Umber force. After a while they reached the center of the camp. This was the first area where he noticed heavy fighting was taking place. He saw how some 2,000 enemy soldiers had gathered around the command tent in a loose square formation. His troops had clearly crashed against their formation from two sides, as clear dents could be seen in the enemy line. Yet, they still held and heavy man-on-man fighting had replaced cavalry charges. Instead of joining in the fray like so many others, he ordered a good-sized company of men to flank around with him. It was at this time, Grey and Ghost decided to show up. They quickly fell in line with him, both protectively running alongside him as his guards fell back to give them space. The company rode around to the west side, some 200 men strong. There they charged into the enemy, having far more success than the troops on the other side. At the last moment, the direwolves sped up and attacked in front of him. They managed to kill or redirect all spear or pikesmen that pointed in his direction. Their follow-up charge cut through the enemy like a knife through butter, and they pushed the enemy line almost 100 yards back, killing dozens, if not hundreds, of footmen in the meantime. A big group of soldiers to his right, wearing the red wine colors, were open to being flanked because of this. He silently cursed himself, as he hadn't thought of a follow-up charge. Still, he fought on. All he could do was hope they wouldn't circle around his position and trap him here. Mere moments later, he heard another big commotion over the sounds of battle. He pulled himself back a little bit and looked around to see what had happened. As he looked to the right, he saw how the red wine men had been charged by a force in Dustin and Bolton colors and immediately knew it was Domeric. The few hundred red wine soldiers were decimated by the charge, as some of his troops impulsively charged into their rear. The result was devastating, that was even clear from where he stood. He could say a lot about House Bolton, but Domeric might well be the best cavalry commander in his force. He didn't know how the rest of the battle was going, but in the middle they were making steady progress. Slowly, but surely, the enemy was being pushed back, he noted as he slashed at an enemy's face. Suddenly, he felt his horse give way, and years of training and developing his instincts told him to jump off. From the corner of his eye, he saw how a spear was sticking out of the stallion's belly. He tried to roll on his shoulder, but felt dazed and hurt nonetheless. He stayed on the ground for a few seconds to catch his breath, a choice that would have meant his end if not for Grey Wind. 2 enemy knights had seen him, laying there on the ground. They charged him. He tried to block the left one's axe with his sword but knew it to be fruitless from the beginning. Just as the axe came down, his faithful companion barreled into the 2 knights. This was all the time he needed to get up. He saw how his guards closed the line to stop more enemies from pouring in. This gave him the opportunity to quickly walk over towards the knight with the axe, Grey occupying the other one. "Yield!" he shouted, as he got close. The man didn't respond as he went for his axe. The weapon had been thrown 3 foot away to his left and he saw the man lunge towards it. He ran over and stabbed the man in the knee. The piercing scream that followed was soon drowned out by the sounds of steel clashing on steel close by. To his surprise, the wounded knight still went for his axe and swung it aggressively at him. He jumped out of the way and went back into his stance. He came prepared for the second swing and deflected it to the right. He stepped in, kicked the axe out of the man's hand and put his sword under the knight's chin. "I yield," the man growled. He knew he didn't deserve it, but he still lowered his sword. He turned around to signal a retainer to take him away, just as he heard a growl behind him. He turned back. Behind him was the knight, his throat torn out by his direwolf. As he looked at the man's right hand, he saw how he had been holding a hidden throwing dagger. He walked over to his 4-legged friend, quickly glancing to the other knight's death body. He quickly hugged Grey. "Thank you, boy. You saved my life twice. I'll make sure that you'll be given fresh deer for the next few days." His direwolf bristled at that, clearly thinking he should receive more. "When we're back in Riverrun, you and Ghost will be hosted as kings every day, I promise," he responded the wolf, as he patted his blooded head. He looked around and saw his friends were holding the line. He unstrapped ice from his back and took the 2-handed sword in his hands. No better weapon to use on foot than this one. He shared a look with Grey and, after that, they charged into the fray together. Fighting with ice in his hands and Grey by his side would be the closest he ever came to the joy the Umbers talked about feeling in battle. He split armor, destroyed shield and cut off limbs left and right, while his back was always protected by his companion or his guard. A few minutes later, he saw the Tyrell standard go down in the distance. After that, the enemy morale was broken. First, 1 or 2 started surrendering, but soon they threw down their weapons by the dozens. A fresh charge on the other side was all that it took and the remaining few hundred men in the center all gave up. He quickly demanded a horse and rode on, rallying all the men to charge deeper into the enemy camp. He just rode through, meeting no resistance until he reached the burning southern part. There the fighting seemed to have been heavy, but his men were on the verge of ending this. A scattered shield wall was being pushed into the flames, but fiercely resisted still. All the while, man-on-man fighting was happening between the flaming tents. He led his men to the front line, and just as they were about to join, a man started shouting over the sounds of steel clashing on steel. He looked to his left and saw that it was Smalljan. "Your lord is dead. Mace Tyrell is dead. Surrender now and you will be spared. If you don't, you will die just like he did." He saw many of the enemies look around towards each other, before they all surrendered too. He rode to the front and took command of the situation, ordering men to surround the flaming parts of the encampment and others to take care of the prisoners. He spent the next 15 minutes taking charge of the prisoners and dozing the flames, as the battle was won. No real opposition had been left in the encampment, by now it had been swept away, and his men were already looting the camp. Then he finally saw the Umber banner. He called for his guards and turned his horse towards it. Soon, the booming figure that was the Great Jon came into view and he rode straight for it. The giant lord was laughing with one of his brothers and both his sons, clearly happy with the victory. He rode through his troops towards the giant's presence. He quickly passed through the rows of men, as no one mistook Greywind and they all went out of their way. "Lord Umber, how are things here? I was stuck on the other side and would like a report," he asked one of his most loyal vassals. "Ah, your grace. The enemy outside of the palisade has been destroyed. Both on the fields, as well as the small group that rode into the forest. The enemy core group in the center was defeated, as you well know. All prisoners from both are being gathered on the field there, while we keep the nobles apart. It was total victory, only on the south side a few thousand of the Reachmen managed to retreat. Even so, this army is done for," his vassal told him gleefully. He smiled back. "I will give you a moment to catch up with friends and family and to look to your own men. I ask that you see me in the keep an hour before dawn together with Smalljan. I will ask the other lords to be present as well. Don't drink too much, we will leave here again by noon tomorrow. I don't want the enemy to do to us what we just did to them." The whole Umber clan nodded dutifully at that, so he left them in peace. He looked around to try and find Jon, until he realized there was an easier way of doing that. He looked towards Greywind and just told him, "Bring me to Ghost." His direwolf looked at him for a while, before doing something what looked like a nod and bolting off. He soon followed suit, but behind him he heard Robin Flint and Sir Donal Locke mutter about how unnatural that was. He would either have to say something about the direwolves to his companions soon, or he would need to learn to hide it better. 2 minutes later, Grey had found Ghost and Jon wasn't far behind. He hugged his brother, as he saw that he was unharmed. "How'd it go?" he whispered in his ear. "Great, after I got you out of Greywind, I brought Ghost to a safer area deeper in one of the stables. I then left him and took command of the rearguard you had set aside for me. We clashed in after the fields was already cleared. And me and my man circled around to attack from the east with the Umbers. I took down a high tower knight, apparently, he was some distant kin of the main branch." Jon responded. He clasped him on the back. "If you keep making a name for yourself like this, you'll force me to reward you in the future." He smiled. His brother smirked back. "I wouldn't mind that." Together they took care of a few things and ordered the men to set up camp. After that, they rode towards the castle together. The gates were opened quickly for them. In the courtyard, he was welcomed by Lady Smallwood. After sharing some tales of the battle, they shared bread and salt and he asked her to make some rooms ready for him and his lords. Lady Smallwood, formerly of House Swan, was more than welcoming until he told her she better pack everything of value to her house and leave with him tomorrow. Why, she had asked him. Because Lord Tyrell's youngest son is going to come back in revenge with an even larger force and destroy Acorn Hall. He had replied. Angry, she had resigned herself to her fate and started packing. Now, a few hours later, he was standing in the great hall with all his lords and commanders. "Harry, you have the final battle report." "Yes, your grace, I do," he responded. "To our estimation, the Tyrells lost just under 10,000 men. Between 7 and 8,000 are dead and over 2,000 are captured. Sir Lawrence Tyrrell, Sir Bertram Beesbury and the Norwich seemed to have successfully retreated some 3,000 men. They were last seen marching westwards. They'll probably try to link up with Lord Rowan's force at Wayfarer's Rest. An interesting thing was that multiple men saw that the young Tyrrell had to be dragged away by his companions. Apparently, the boy wanted to fight and save his father. His brother-in-law explained. What happened to his father and the other nobles? He asked. Lord Mace Tyrrell died, although not in the fighting in the centre as you would expect. He was hit by an arrow, as he was trying to flee the square of his own troops to the safety of his son. Harry On's reply came. This led to a muttering amongst his lords. The former Lord of Highgarden was scolded for cowardice by Riverlord and Northmen alike. He couldn't blame them. The man had thrown his honor, army and life away by fleeing. Do we know who the archer was? He asked. His brother-in-law looked at him. Yes, I think so. Why? I promised the men a great reward in silver for whomever delivered me Mace or Lawrence Tyrrell. Sir Wendell, could you see to it that the man is adequately rewarded? The Marndaily knight nodded to him and so he continued. What about the other deaths? The Carstarker picked up a list from under his belt and started reading. These are the other notable ones. Lord Paxter Redwine, who held the square in the centre for a long time. Lord Medwick Norwich and his cousin Sir Normand, who were charged down on the fields in the beginning of the battle with much of their men. Sir Theodore Tyrrell, the son of one of Mace's cousins. Sir Tristan Hightower, a distant cousin of the main branch, who was slain by Lord Jon Snow. Sir Hugh Beesbury, youngest brother to the Lord and two footly cousins, Sir Martin and Sir Morgan. The captives. He continued and Harry On started reading off his list again. Lord Brunston Huey, the Lord of Sunhouse. Sir Denys Footley, who is the heir to Tumbleton. Luther Tyrrell, a squire, who is the son of the dead Sir Theodore. Some far more distant Tyrrells, Sir Elimer Tyrrell and his son Raymond, a squire, and Sir Leo Tyrrell. Denys Redwine, a squire from a minor branch of House Redwine. Finally, Sir Eustace Hightower, distant cousin and the brother to the dead Sir Tristan. Captives from houses Tyrrell, Hightower and Redwine, however distant, are always nice to have. Besides that, both a lord and the heir to the house who has the biggest border with the Riverlands. I like that. How about our own casualties? He asked, as he now looked at Lord Mallister. Due to our charges and the element of surprise, our casualties in most of the battle were negligible. Only in the center and on the south side of the encampment did we really lose men. In total, some 350 heavy cavalry and 150 light cavalry are either dead or too wounded to take with us. I don't expect many of them to survive the night anyway. Besides that, we have another 500 to 600 men with light wounds. If we slow down our marching speed just a little, I expect most, if not all, of them to make it and heal by the time we reach Riverrun. Lord Jason dutifully explained. He was surprised by that. He knew that they had won a big victory, but he had an expected odds of 20 to 1. Did we lose any important nobles? He asked. Some landed knights and cousins of greater houses, but only one essential to the king's peace. Young Lord Limond Goodbrook was slain by Sir Hugh Beesbury. He was later avenged by his cousin and heir Sir Gas Goodbrook. The latter, here present, will inherit all lands and titles of House Goodbrook. The Lord of Seaguard told him, as he looked over to the right to a knight in his 20s. Be welcome, Lord Gas. He said respectfully. The new lord bowed slightly in response, but he didn't like the look in the man's eyes. He would have to keep an eye on that one after the war. How about horses? We lost around 1,000, however we have managed to capture around 2,000 in good enough condition from the Tyrrells, so we actually gained on that front. Lord Jason responded. Well then, this battle was an even bigger success than most of us imagined. However, we don't have any time to celebrate it. If we stay here, the force under Lord Rowan can, and will, attack us and do the same to us as we did to his liege here. Tomorrow, we march at noon. We will ride back to Stonehenge and from there to Riverrun. He ordered and all his lords agreed easily enough, only a little annoyed because their possibilities of a feast had been shot down. Lord Glover. He called and Galbart immediately stepped forward. Aye, Your Grace. I want you to take 200 light cavalry and screen all along our west flank, up towards the Rowan host. I don't want any surprises. He ordered him. It shall be done, your grace. The Northman responded, as he stepped back. Lord D'Ari. Now the Riverlander Lord stepped forward, albeit less certain than Lord Galbart had. Yes, your grace. You will do the same to the east with 100 outriders. I want to know where Tali is at all times. I suspect you know the area well enough. He ordered. Yes, your grace, as you command. Lord Raymond replied, somewhat surprised but happy that he was given a command. It might also have to do with the fact that he could scout out information about his home because of this. Thank you all, this meeting is dismissed. I expect to see you and your men at noon tomorrow, all ready to leave. We will use the same marching order as before. He ended the meeting. He walked to the chambers he had been given by Lady Smallwood. His body suddenly felt extremely tired, as the battle fatigue started to set in. He let himself fall on the bed and only took off his boots, not bothering with the rest of his clothes. What will you do now, Tywine? What will be your counter-move? He thought as his mind drifted off to sleep. Chapter 40, The Crannog Lord Appears. 300 AC. John. Yesterday evening, they had arrived back in Riverrun. A few hours ago, the Blackfish and the majority of his forces had made it back as well. A big victory feast was being planned for tonight to celebrate their victory together. It was important for the men to reward victories, and a night spent dancing and drinking ale was always good for the morale. The whole army command knew that it was probably the last time before the battle that the troops could enjoy themselves and had agreed this was a good idea. If you thought about it, you realized that it would be the last feast of their lives for many of those men. Maybe that was another good reason to feast, so you didn't realize. Rob had relieved him of his duties today. He had told him to have some fun. Well, actually he had told him to maybe go find a girl, but he wouldn't be doing that. Instead, he would go for a ride. Initially, he had planned to just go with Ghost, but Sir Wendell and Sir Donal Locke had asked to go with him. They each brought some retainers with them, so they soon consisted of a small group. The hills and fields around Riverrun were lovely, he needed to admit. Seeing this land, even in late autumn, was a stark contrast with their homeland. He started to understand how difficult it must have been for Lady Caitlin to come to Winterfell after being used to this. Still, that didn't excuse her for how she treated him all these years. Sir Wendell and Sir Donal were from neighbouring houses in the southeast of the north. They spent a lot of time talking about the politics there, before switching to the war in the Vale. Both of them had family with the force sent to aid them. While Lord Wyman Marndaly had sent his cousin Sir Marlon to lead the Marndaly force, Lord Andrew Locke had sent his nephew Sir Roderick Locke. Donal affectionately called his little cousin Roddy, as he apparently had spent much time watching him in his youth. From the time that he had spent with Sir Wendell, he knew a lot about the area and the houses present there. Because of that, he could easily join in on the conversations. They also talked about their families. Sir Wendell talked about his kin in the Hornwood and his nieces, Winifred and Wyler. All the while, Sir Donal talked about his sister in Deepwood Motte and the loss of his brother at the war. To his surprise, the whole day passed by rather quickly. When Ghost had spotted a few deer, they had even decided to try to hunt them. While they were unsuccessful due to a lack of preparation and equipment, Ghost had managed to kill 2. They had given one to him so he could enjoy his spoils, while they brought the second one back for the feast tonight. Some fresh deer never hurt anyone. After they came back, he took a bath and by then it was time to prepare for the feast. He changed himself in some new clothes that Rob had made for him. The trousers were of a simple black color, but the quality was excellent. The tunic however was special. It was of a dark grey color and in the middle was stitched a running white direwolf. The whole tunic was the stark coat of arms in reverse. This was a thing often done by bastards of noble houses, although for him it felt more special due to the fact it was clearly Ghost that was stitched onto his tunic. Rob had made sure of that, as the eyes on his chest were clearly red. When he was ready to depart, he woke his companion who had been sleeping at the fire. The direwolf noticed his tunic and looked at him weirdly, as if understanding it was him it resembled. Ghost slightly turned his head, as he sat next to the fire. clearly checking his tunic again. Until, he suddenly waggled over to him and jumped towards him. The jump was hard enough to push him to the floor, but not enough to actually hurt him. Before he knew it, his face was being licked while he was pinned down on the floor by a few 100-pound direwolf. He laughed it off and cuddled up to Ghost, until after a while he pushed him off. "Glad you like the tunic, buddy," he said as he petted his head. He went back into his rooms and splashed some water on his face. After fixing his hair and making sure he looked presentable once more, he left for the door. His direwolf huffed and his look was suspiciously close to scorn about his vanity. However, he hadn't fought in numerous battles to let himself be told what to do by an overgrown dog, even if it was his own. He opened the door and looked back at his companion who just sat there. "Are you coming? Or do you want me to change the tunic and leave you here locked up for the night?" He huffed once again but got up and joined him in the hallway. The guard in front of his door looked at him funnily, but he didn't care. It was a good man, albeit a little simple. Nothing to see here, except a man talking to his overgrown pet. When he finally made it into the great hall, he saw it was already filled to the brink. There had been a time where he would have looked for a quiet place among the lower tables, but that had long passed. Now, he confidently walked over to the head table. He immediately saw how his brother had left the place to his left empty for him and he smiled. You could always trust Rob to include him and on top of that give him a place far above his station. The only place better than that was the one to his right, but that was of course taken by Lord Edmure Tully. After the death of the man's father, he was the most powerful man in the kingdoms except for Rob himself. Besides that, he was of course his uncle. To Edmure's right sat the Blackfish and some important Riverland vassals, like Lord Titos, sat further along. He had expected the Great Jon, Harry On or even Sir Willis to sit next to the vacant place where he would sit, but that wasn't the case. Instead a man, he hadn't seen before, was seated. As he walked closer, he noticed the man to be very short of stature, not much bigger than a child. However, there was no mistake possible that this was indeed an adult, his full-grown beard attested to that. When he walked up to the dais, he realized the man must be a Cranogman. He knew they had helped in the recapture of Moat Cailin, but he hadn't seen any of the people of the Neck yet. This night might prove for interesting conversation after all. He sat down and greeted his brother, thanking him for keeping his seat. After speaking about a few small points with him, he turned to the stranger next to him. "I don't think we have had the pleasure to meet each other yet. My name is Jon Snow." He presented himself. "Ah, now that is a far from the truth, young Lord Snow. In fact, we have met already. Although, I don't hold it against you that you do not remember me. Last time I saw you, you were just a babe after all." The man smiled mysteriously. He looked at the Cranogman in surprise, not having expected this. He tried to stay as polite as he could be. "You have me at a disadvantage, my lord. As you seem to know me, but I can't say the same." The man's green eyes looked at him intently, before answering his question. "Excuse me, my name is Howland Reed." Now his eyes almost popped out of his head. He should have known. What other Cranogman would be seated so highly by his brother than the Lord of Greywater Watch? "I see from your reaction that you have heard of me." The man smirked, ever so mysterious. "Of course, I have, my lord. My father counted you among his best friends. Every time we, as young boys, asked him about his fight with Aeris legendary Kingsguard, the only thing he talked about was that you were the only reason that he was still alive." He answered, his former youthful admiration unintentionally slipping into his voice. However, instead of being flattered, Lord Reed had the same sad and distant look on his face that his father always had sported when asked about his fight with the Sword of the Morning. In a way I did, but it is not the heroic tale you might think it is," he replied. "Would you care telling me and my brother?" he asked the man. "There were so many things that we believe our father intended to tell us when we were older, but he never got the chance to do so. You could help us with some of those." His hopes skyrocketing. He missed his father dearly and had often prayed for his guidance during this war. Hearing new stories about him, and about how he survived his war when he was their age, was worth more to him than all the gold in the world. I could, and I will, but I don't think it's his war stories you would really want to hear from him. You lament the fact he didn't have the time to tell you other things about yourself, don't you? Howland responded, as his green eyes seemed to pierce deep into his soul. How do you know? He managed to get out, as he thought about his mother and the fact that he would never get to know who she was. Ghost quickly jumped to his feet next to him, looking intensely at his conversation partner. His confusion probably having alerted him. Lord Reed just looked at the direwolf, who was certainly bigger than he was. Without fear, he just stretched his hand to let the direwolf sniff at it. After he did, he just scratched Ghost under his chin. A thing the direwolf seemed to appreciate greatly. I know many things, young John. Lord Howland responded. There was a time when others knew as well, but now with the loss of your father the burden rests solely on my shoulders. He continued sadly. I don't understand. Was all that he managed to respond. No, of course you don't, but you will. Even so, it won't be tonight. Tonight, we speak of lighter things. I will you tell stories about Lord Eddard you probably haven't heard before. We will laugh and reminisce, my good old friend, while I get to know the next generation of old Lord Ricard's offspring. Tomorrow we will talk of more serious things. Now is a time to celebrate, I heard. The man smiled. Tomorrow? He just asked. Tomorrow. Lord Howland agreed. Good, my brother and I will be there. He responded, knowing full well that Rob would want to hear whatever Lord Reed had to say as well. The Crannog Lord didn't respond to that, as he just looked into his eyes. After a few seconds, his expression changed. Now, let me tell you the story of the time when your father decided to take a bath in one of the springs not far from Fairmarket, and how he was discovered by 3 peasant girls during the act. Howland laughed. They spent the next few hours exchanging stories. First, Lord Reed told many stories about his father, going from embarrassing ones to drunken brawls and war stories. In response he talked about his upbringing and the war. Later on, Howland also told him of the neck and the many things that lived there. From time to time, Rob also joined in, eager for stories about their father. What had seemed to him as a feast solely to uplift the morale of the troops, turned into one of the most interesting nights of his life. The next morning, he walked over to his brother. What do you think we'll hear, Rob? Honestly, I don't know, John. Lord Reed knew our father from before the rebellion. He was there at Harrenhal and fought with him all throughout the war. He knows hundreds of stories from father we don't even know exist. Even worse, he knows a side of our father that we never got to see. Just like Arya, Bran or Rickon don't know the side of us that we had to become to fight this war, we don't know how he was back then. His brother replied. You're right. Whatever it is, I'm glad we finally get to hear it. He'll always be our father, no matter what. Doesn't matter what he had to do to survive. They both looked at each other, while absently scratching their direwolves' heads. After a deep breath, they walked out of the room towards the solar where Lord Reed was waiting. They greeted the guard, called Tomard, and went inside. Good day, Lord Reed. Rob started off the conversation regally. Surprised, the man immediately got up from his chair. Your Grace, I didn't expect you here. He seemed more perplexed by Rob's presence, than the looming figures of 2 adult direwolves the size of large ponies standing next to him. No. I thought you proposed John to talk about things concerning our father. As his heir, I would like to be part of that discussion as well. His brother said, clearly annoyed. Of course, Your Grace. You misunderstand, I'm afraid. I not only wanted to talk about your father with young John. You are more than welcome in the parts concerning Lord Eddard, but I would respectfully ask you for some time alone right after. There are some things John should hear alone. The short man explained, respectful but defiant at the same time. What is it that I should hear alone? Rob is my brother, king and best friend. He knows everything about me. He can hear whatever you have to say. He quickly shot back. Respectfully, John, he can't. Whatever I have to tell is for your ears and your ears only. If you wish His Grace to remain in the room, I can't tell either of you. The Cranogman replied to their astonishment. You do realize that I am your king. Rob riposted. It was clear that he had difficulty trying to stay calm. I do, Your Grace. As such, I have always followed your orders concerning the Ironborn at Moat Cailin. Now, myself and 150 of my best men are here to join your army and fight with you if you will have us. I am, and forever will be, a loyal vassal to House Stark. No matter in what capacity, either as kings or just lords of Winterfell. Yet, you still won't tell me? His brother asked, somewhat calmed by the staunch loyalty the man in front of him showed to their family. No, Your Grace. I promised Lord Eddard to never tell a soul. I would have done that gladly and taken this knowledge to my death. Sadly, circumstances force me to do otherwise. Your father forced me to swear on the old gods to never tell anyone, on the condition he had to tell the news to Jon himself. Now, your father is dead and I'm the only man left that knows. It is my duty to tell Jon, instead of your father. Despite that, I am still bound by my oath to Ned and I can't tell anyone else, not even his son and heir. The Cranogman responded and he couldn't shake the fact that the man didn't look happy about it either. Rob, respecting an oath given to father, finally relented. Good, tell me some of the stories about father and after that I will excuse myself, so you have time alone with Jon. The next 2 hours were spent talking about their father. How a silent second-born son, that had lived away from the north for half his life, had become the Lord Eddard they had known growing up. Lord Reed parted with a lot of wisdom he and his father had learned about ruling and war, about loyalty and trust and about justice and revenge. Lord Reed clearly had their best interest at heart and tried to educate them about different subjects to the best of his abilities. In return he listened to what they already knew, clearly surprised at their maturity and their skill when it came to leading men. After these hours, Lord Howland reminded Rob of his promise to leave. He could see in his brother's eyes that he had gained a lot of respect for the Kragon Lord, but that he still wanted to stay. Instead, he agreed to leave but there was something in those bright blue eyes that made him pause. His brother had a plan. He turned towards him. Jon, I'll leave Grey here with you. I have work to do anyway and he'll appreciate Ghost's company. He said with a wink and it dawned on him. Rob would try to follow the conversation from Grey's eyes. Just as he walked over to the door, Lord Howland interrupted him. That won't be necessary, Your Grace. As I already said, this story is not for your ears. That includes warging, I'm afraid. Rob immediately let go of the door handle and abruptly turned around. You know. He almost shrieked. Of course, I do. I've known from the moment I saw the two of you walk into the hole yesterday evening. I had my suspicions before, especially as I heard more and more details about your clash against the Tyrells, but it was then I knew for sure. Lord Reed responded. How did you know about warging? We thought it nothing more than a children's tale. We denied it for months, until we started to talk about it together. We noticed we remembered the same dreams, saw the same things. We could tell where our wolves were without looking. How do you know all of this? He asked in shock. The old histories are very much alive in the neck. Where many of the old things were forgotten in most of the north in the last 1,000 years, we, among other remote places, remembered. Few skin changers live in the neck, but some do. Other old powers also remain, like the Green Sight. Yet, we have known for a long time that our neighbors and our overlords the Starks have forgotten. In fear of becoming even more ostracized, we stayed silent and thought it to our own children. The Cranog Lord responded. The last 1,000 years. I thought the mythical wars against the Warg King and Gaven Grey Wolf were much earlier. Rob joined in. They were, but they weren't the end of the Wargs or other skin changers. Legend has it that most of the kings of winter were Wargs themselves. There is a reason direwolves are your coat of arms and that Starks are buried with stone direwolves at their feet. No, it only really started to change with the influence of the Andals. For thousands of years, your ancestors fought them off, often with the help of mine at Moat Cailin. It was only after the Mandaelis came north, and their influence slowly spread, that the old powers of the old gods were no longer looked upon with awe. After that, several smaller houses also took to the Seven, but due to intermarriage their way slowly crept north until Mandaeli queens and the descendants of Mandaeli ladies started to change the kingdom in a more Andal fashion. Lord Howland started to explain. The Starks and most other houses never forgot their first men roots, nor the old gods. However, they did forget much and more that was associated with these roots. Great gifts given by the gods became history. History became legend. Legend became myth, and finally myth became a spook story for children. Now, it seems the members of House Stark have finally remembered their roots. It is no coincidence yours are the first direwolves back on this side of the wall in centuries. Lord Reed finished. So, why can we do it? Can you? Robb asked. To first answer your second question, no, I cannot. However, my son Hojan has the green sight. He can see the future sometimes, although cryptically. It is very hard to decipher green dreams and a dangerous undertaking to try. To why you can do it. Simple, it's in your blood. The Cranogman shrugged. In our blood. How so? He asked. Well, you both share the blood of the kings of winter. You know the stories of the Walk King and the Marsh Kings. They both responded in unison. Well, then you may know that in both cases the kings of winter killed these kings and their sons. Their daughters they didn't kill, they married them either to themselves or their sons, there the sources diverge. Not that it matters too much, they married the magical bloodlines into their own. They did it before too, but those are the better known ones. It gave them both a stronger bloodline and a greater legitimacy over the parts of the north they conquered. As for the example of the Marsh King, the neck followed the Starks ever after as their descendants. Lord Howland told them. How do you know all of this? Robb blurted out. Well, this particular story because it is also my own. A fact that is little known outside of the neck is that the Marsh King had two daughters. The elder one, the heir, married into the Starks. The younger one married my ancestor and forever gave House Reed legitimacy among the Crannog folk. Since then, the descendants of the younger branch, the Reeds, have ruled the area in name of the older branch, the Starks. Both were silent for a while. It made so much sense it actually hurt. Still, one big question remained. Can you teach us? He asked aloud. If you mean how to walk, no I can't. If you mean the theories and old histories surrounding it, yes, and it would be my pleasure to do so with the both of you. The other pups too when we get back north. The small lord loyally declared. The other pups? Robb asked. Your siblings are probably walks too from what I've heard. Especially Arya and Sansa if you can believe the stories, but I'd be willing to wager Brandon and even young Rickon too. The blood is strong this generation it seems. Lord Reed mused. Wait, but if it's in the blood then why don't the other houses have it too? The Starks have intermarried almost all of the big northern houses and their descendants have married the smaller ones too. In the last 100 years and 50 years, Starks have married into the Umbers and Sowins and even now lesser branches still remain. Why aren't they all walks too? Robb asked. Well, that's a more difficult question. First of all, some of those might well have some abilities because of it, be it warging or something else. Secondly, not all members who carry the blood will show any of the abilities. You have to remember it has been centuries since the Starks have warged into direwolves, yet you both still carry it. Thirdly, it seems that sometimes the blood gets too muddied and the abilities aren't passed on anymore to future generations. This was long thought to have happened to the Starks, although this clearly wasn't the case. Lord Howland explained. So, there are others out there? He asked. Of course. Why do you think my house displays a lizard lion? Or the Mormonts a bear? Or House Hornwood a bull moose? Their early ancestors probably skin changed into those animals and took it as their coat of arms. Much the same as you have done recently, young John. The Crannog Lord spoke. He nodded, remembering yesterday's tunic that had ghost stitched on it. Any more pranging questions about skin changing? I'll promise to teach you more, but that is not for today. They both told him no. Then I would like to talk with John now, Your Grace. Could you ask the guards to remove themselves from the door? I think Ghost here is more than enough protection if needed. Very well. His brother replied and he left, but not before throwing him a supportive look. Grey Wind quickly followed after him. So, what is this all about? He asked when they were all alone. Your mother, John. This is about your mother. My mother. He responded in complete and utter shock. Yes. There was a time when only Ned and I knew. After that, I'm pretty sure he told your Uncle Benjamin. I believe it to be the reason he joined the Night's Watch in the first place. Now, Ned is dead and Benjamin is presumed to be so as well. I am the only one left who knows. Lord Howland explained, as he turned sad and serious. What do you know of my mother? Do you know who she is? Do you know what kind of person she is? Do you know where she lives? He blurted out. A small hope was quickly rising in his chest. Maybe he could have a mother. I know who she was. I counted her as one of my best friends. Your mother was a formidable woman, John. Lord Reed replied to his questions. Was, you said was. Is she? He asked, suddenly fearful. Yes, sadly she is. She died giving birth to you in the mountains of Dawn. The reply came, raw sadness and sorrow audible in those two sentences. Oh, who was she? He asked, as fear gripped his heart. Maybe she had a family, like Rob had the Tullys. She could have brothers or uncles for him to bond with and tell stories about her. The Crannog Lord in front of him sighed heavily as he looked down, before looking straight into his eyes. Her name was Lyanna Stark. After those 5 words, his whole life came crashing down. How, who, what, why, how? He said in repeating order. Your mother was Lyanna Stark, daughter of Lord Rickard Stark and one of the fiercest women I've ever met. She died in the mountains of Dawn giving birth to you. Ned and I found her as she was dying. Lord Howland continued. My father. He whispered in shock, as he didn't know what to think. His thoughts going from incest to his father not being his father and back. Lord Eddard Stark was actually your uncle, not your father. However, on her deathbed your mother made him swear on the old gods that he would protect you. Many conversations I had with your uncle, as we tried to decide what to do and how to best keep you safe. Finally, it was decided that he would claim you as his own bastard. That way you would be hidden and safe, while still being with family. The answer to the question hit him like nothing ever had. His father, his one true constant in this world, was once again ripped from him. First his death, leaving him with only memories. Now all memories were taken from him too, as they turned out to be nothing more than lies. Lord Reed saw the shock and disgust over the lies in his face. He looked at him sharply. Ned loved you, John. On our way home to the north, he cared for you like few fathers would for their own children. Every night he rocked you to sleep in his arms. He cared for you both as a son and as the last remnant of his beloved sister. He let Lady Caitlin threat me as dirt. She hates me because she thinks that I pose a threat to Rob. If I'm his nephew, I never posed a threat at all. If he told the Northern Lords, none would ever follow me. Lady Caitlin would have let me be. He said in anger. He couldn't tell anyone, ever. Your life would have been in danger. The Crannog Lord responded. How? I'm just the nobody bastard of a lady of a great house. I just accidentally look like my uncle. Those bastards are a dime a dozen in West Eos. He shouted back, as he started pacing throughout the room. You are not a bastard, John. That's why. Your mother married your father under the face of a weirwood tree near the God's Eye. Afterwards, a Septon also married them for the 7. I have all the marriage documents with me, here. Lord Howland said, as he pointed to a bag that was set near the desk. He looked anxiously at it, until it dawned on him. His father, if Lord Stark wasn't his father, who was? Suddenly he thought back about the stories he knew of Aunt Lyanna, how she had been kidnapped by Prince Roriger. You can't seriously mean that my father is. He blurted out. That your father is Prince Roriger Targaryen. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Now you understand why Ned couldn't reveal anything about your birth to anyone. You would have been in severe danger. Robert Baratheon would have never allowed you to live, let alone Tywin Lannister. The small lord replied, and rarely had he seen a man talk with this severity in his eyes. Even though, he still didn't understand. Why would they want to kill me? I was just a babe, nothing more. He asked. John, think. After the deaths of Prince Rhaegar, Aegon and Rhaenys and King Aerys, who would be the Targaryen heir to the throne? You can't be serious. You mean me? King of the Seven Kingdoms? He shouted in disbelief. As he heard himself, he finally realized why Lord Reed had asked for the guards to be removed from the door. Of course, I am serious, John. Why do you think Ned and I had to fight the Kingsguard? Why do you think we lost 5 good friends that day? It's because they wouldn't allow Ned to see your mother and you. They were protecting their new king. Arthur Dane almost killed your uncle. I only managed to stop him because I stabbed him in the back with a poisonous blade. Rhaegar left the best of the Kingsguard with his unborn child, with you. Lord Howland retorted. He had to sit down from that. He had always wondered why his father had fought the Sword of the Morning. It was because of him. They had been shielding him away. His father had fought for him and his mother. No, not your father, your uncle, a small voice in the back of his mind told him. Your father gave you a new name and claimed him as your own. The mistreatment Lady Catelyn gave you served as the best armor he could ever give you. No one could accuse the Honorable Lord Eddard Stark from lying to his wife and hiding the Targaryen claimant to the throne. Lord Reed continued. He had to compartmentalize all that information. First things first. A new name. Yes, your mother called you Jaehaerys Targaryen. After the Conciliator, arguably the best Targaryen king there ever was. Although it needs to be said that some northern houses, like the Umbers, would likely disagree with that assessment. He made them lose a lot of lands to the new gift. Anyway, she hoped you would be able to conciliate both of your families in the future. Her ideas came too late. By the time your uncle knew, most of your father's family was already dead. Ned chose a logical name for you, as befitting the mummery. There was both a precedent of a king of winter named Jon Stark, as well as calling you after his former foster father Jon Arryn. Nobody batted an eye about it. Both Lord Arryn and King Robert even sent congratulations for your birth. Those were not public, of course, due to bastard status. Why have Lady Catelyn mistreat me like that? Why not give in to her and send me away? He asked the Crannog Lord. First of all, because he loved you. You had won over your uncle, long before we ever reached the neck. He first came to love you for the sister he lost, and after that he loved you like his own son. Ned had lost much in the war. His father, brother and sister had all died, while his younger brother couldn't live with his guilt and soon left for the war. He was all alone in Winterfell, except for you and Robb. He never wanted any of you to leave. But we all left in the end. Robb went to Carhold and I to White Harbor. Even Bran went here in Riverrun. He interjected. Yes, but that was much later and is a different story. Your father held you and the other pups too close and the Northern Lords started complaining. That's why you were fostered later on. In truth, there were other possibilities for your upbringing from the start. I myself proposed to raise you in Greywater Watch, but Ned refused. You should be raised with your kin and would know your family, that was a thing that he wouldn't budge on. He all but ignored your Targaryen ancestry and said you were a descendant of House Stark, just like Robb, and that you would be raised as such. He even risked his own marriage for it. Lord Howland told him. That gave him pause. It was true, when he was younger, he had often seen Lady Catelyn's fury. Nonetheless, it didn't matter what she said or did. Lord Stark never sent me away. Even with the foster offer from Sir Wendell, he had been hesitant and had asked for his opinion. He would have been allowed to stay if that was what he had wanted at the time, he was sure of it. Still, his whole world was upside down. He felt dizzy and his mouth was dry. He both wanted to cry and kill something at the same time. As he thought about that, Ghost came close to him. He started hugging and licking him, as if to make him feel better. Thank you, boy. He whispered. So, I am actually a Targaryen? He asked, only half believing it himself. You are not just a Targaryen. You are the last male Targaryen left alive. You are the heir to their legacy and if you want it, their throne. King Jaehaerys, the third of your name, Sir Arthur Dane called you. Lord Reed responded. The Iron Throne. But I have been fighting for over a year now, to help the North secede from it. How could I ever rule that? Why would I want it? He questioned. Those are problems you need to solve for yourself. I cannot give you the right answers, as I do not have them. His conversation partner admitted. He had to swallow hard on that on. Hadn't he always wanted the attention Rob had been given when he was younger? It could be his now, but did he still want it? Besides, what would Rob say? Would he support him? He put those questions aside from now. He had many others that could be answered. You said my parents had married. I thought Roriger had kidnapped Lyanna. That was Robert's version of it. He couldn't understand that Lyanna would never love him. She chose Roriger over him and he wouldn't see it. Your parents met at the tourney of Harrenhal. I may have been the reason they first met, it's a story I will tell you later. Over the course of the tourney, they slipped out to talk to each other a few times. Your mother was often helped by Benjen so she could sneak out. There they fell in love. Lord Howland started to explain. Later on, when she was in the Riverlands again for Brandon's wedding, she decided to take off with him so she wouldn't have to marry Robert. Once again Benjen had helped her to see the prince, although he didn't know she planned to marry him before the weirwood tree. Your uncle could never forgive himself that and thought it was his fault that the war commenced. He blamed himself for the death of Lord Ricard, Brandon and Lya and joined the Night's Watch to repent for it ever after, even against the insistence of Ned. He continued. In truth your mother loved Roriger very much. Of his feelings I'm less certain. It was quite clear that he took a liking to your mother, but he was also obsessed with prophecy and the old pact of ice and fire. An old pact for a marriage between House Targaryen and House Stark. Prophecy proclaimed their descendants would do great things. So, can I say that your father really loved your mother? No, but it is very possible. However, your mother was completely in love with Roriger and she went with him willingly. Knowing your mother, it might even have been her idea. She was never kidnapped. The Crannog Lord finished. Why wasn't none of this made public? He asked in shock. Because when the time came that Ned knew, your grandfather and Uncle Brandon were already dead. Ned only knew when he came back north to gather his forces and talked to Benjen and Aerys had already demanded his and Robert's head by that time. In response, Jon Arryn had risen in rebellion and was already attacking Gulltown while Robert had called on the Storm Lords to rally. It was far too late by that point and war could never have been avoided anymore. Besides, Robert would have never listened anyway. So, the Silent Wolf won the war in an extreme bid to get his sister back. He failed in that regard, but he got you in return. Lord Reed responded, compassion and sadness all over his face. So Roriger was not a kidnapping raping lunatic? He asked, trying to match what he knew with the stories he had heard. Well, at least not the first things. He was neither a kidnapper nor a rapist. Maybe he was mad, it's difficult to say. He was a very handsome, eloquent and intelligent prince, but he was also obsessed with prophecy. So, he might have been mad. We don't know. Your grandfather Aerys was though and your uncle Viserys too apparently, if what I heard from over the narrow sea is true. Aerys is my grandfather. He whispered and gulped. The tears almost streaming in his eyes. My grandfather killed my other grandfather and uncle. My father left my mother to die alone, as he fell in battle to Robert Baratheon. My brother and sister were brutally murdered by the Lannisters. He continued whispering. His eyes were so wide open in shock that it hurt, but he couldn't close them. The panic started to raise inside him. Who am I? Will I become such a monster too? Will Rob still want to look at me? Will my friends? Lord Reed closed the distance immediately and grabbed his shoulders. He had to look down at the much older lord as his green eyes pierced into his own. Look Jon, you are nothing like those men. You are a combination of all the strength, loyalty and compassion of your mother and the brooding intelligence of your father. I have watched you the whole night yesterday, fearful of any signs. You have nothing in common with Aerys, nothing. You are the best of both of your parents. But I'm one of them. I could still turn mad, just like Viserys did. He mumbled. No, you can't. You know why? Lord Reed asked him. He shook his head. Because you are not just a Targaryen, you are a Stark too. Look at Ghost next to you. A magnificent beast like that can only be controlled by a person wherein the blood of the kings of winter flows strongly. You are just as much of wolf as you are dragon, if not more. If you weren't, Ghost would have never chosen you. He looked up at those words. He turned to his companion. Ghost nodded towards him and licked his cheek softly, as if he understood what was being said. Maybe he does, he thought, as he looked into those far too intelligent red eyes. So, what now? He finally said, after a long silence. Now you will have to decide what you want to do. I will remain here at your side for the entire time. I will answer all the questions you have about your parents and tell you all of their stories that I know, but in the end, you will have to decide who you tell and who you want to be. The Cranog Lord said, as one of his hands stayed on his shoulder in support. He looked into his eyes and saw that he meant it. This calmed him a little for some reason. I need some time to think, he decided. Of course, I will let you alone. I will leave the documents here with you, so you can verify all you want. Lord Reed respectfully said, as he pointed towards his bag. He nodded absently and the Cranogman left the room. He sat down and stared out of the window for a long time. He absently stared to no point in particular in the distant hills. After a long while, he picked up the bag and sat it on the desk. In there he found a marriage contract, signed by both of his parents. 3 witnesses signed it too, a Septon Gerard, Sir Oswell Went and Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. In the bag there was a flag of House Targaryen bundled together. When he opened the bundle, he found a golden ring in the form of a dragon wrapping around your finger and biting its own tail. Next to it was a simple, yet beautiful, silver necklace with a silver running direwolf on it. There were a few dozen golden dragons spread around as well. Wrapped in the necklace, there was a small paper, folded a few times. When he opened it, he let out his breath in shock. It was a letter addressed to him, by his mother. Dear G. Harries. If you're reading this, it means I am not here anymore. In that case, I wanted you to know a few things. News just came of your grandfather's death and that my brother is marching on Storm's End. I fear I don't have long anymore and you need to know the truth before Robert's lies define your life. First of all, your father never kidnapped me. I loved him and he loved me, I think. I went willingly with him and we wedded under a weirwood tree at the God's Eye. Later on, we married with a Septon, but that didn't matter to me. We conceived you that night, under the weirwood on the banks of the lake and I will forever be grateful for that. Secondly, we never wanted this war. Roriger and I ran away, foolishly. By the time news reached us of the events from Lord Drold, it was too late. Roriger's father had already ruined everything and killed my father and Brandon. If we could undo it, we would, but we can't. Thirdly and most importantly, we love you. I love you. You are my son and you look so alike me. I loved you from the moment I felt your first kick in my belly, and I will love you till the moment my heart stops beating. I don't know where you will be when you read this. In my dreams I hope for you to grow up with Ned and Benjen in Winterfell like I did, but most of all I hope you will be safe. You can be whoever you want to be. You can be a dragon or a wolf, a king or a noble. Whatever you decide, know that I will be proud of you. To me, you will always be special, my son. Your mother, Lyanna Targaryen. He read the letter at least 5 times and he started crying uncontrollably. He sat there for a long while, with his hands in front of his face covering his tears. Ghost trying to comfort him on his lap. After a while, he got up and put everything back into the bag. He walked to the door and left. He went to his room and put it in his chest with valuables, locking it with a key only he had. He went outside and walked to the outer walls. He sat on the battlements in a corner and just stared at nature, trying to get a hold of his thoughts. He didn't know how long he sat there, but by the time his brother found him the sun was starting to set. When he turned around to look at Rob, he noticed how the whole courtyard seemed to be running around and preparing for something. The army in front of the walls was prepping for something too. How had he missed that? John, I've been looking for you for hours. What are you doing here? Rob called out, as he walked over to him. Just thinking, that's all. He replied absently. Apparently, his gaze made even his brother pause. What is it, John. What did Lord Reed tell you? Suddenly, fear gripped his heart. What if his brother, no, cousin, would reject him? What if he would only see him as dragon spawn? I'll tell you another time. He meekly responded out of fear. Rob looked at him critically, until he finally nodded. Well, you missed a lot. News has come in. Tywine has taken both Pink Maiden and Wayfarer's Rest and has rejoined his forces. He is marching on Atlanta as we speak. At the same time, Lord Tarlis' force has taken Deary and Harroway's town. He is now marching on Leicester with 20,000 men. If we don't do something now, they'll unite and attack us here where we're vulnerable. The news of the war hit him like a herd of rocks. He had almost forgotten the war, it seemed so meaningless in comparison to the news he had just gotten. Still, he noticed that his brother needed him. What is your plan? He responded. We can't let them unite. Together they could still field some 55,000 men, and I don't think we can beat that if Lord Tarly leads them. We need to strike now, and we need to strike hard. I have sent out some light cavalry to harry Lord Tarly's force and supply lines. That should give us enough time to march on Atlanta and do battle there with Lord Tywine, before Tarly shows up. If we beat him, Lord Tarly will think twice about attacking us. Maybe we could even break the Lannister /Tyrell alliance if we capture the Old Lion and destroy his force. Rob responded. When do we leave? He asked, knowing his brother, no, cousin, well enough to know that things were already in motion. We leave on the morrow, at first light. We should arrive at Atlanta before Tywine, which would allow us to put up some defenses. Maybe we can even surprise him, as I don't think he'll expect this. Rob explained. I wouldn't be so sure of that after our stunt against Lord Tyrell. He will be alert and won't let it happen a second time. Still, adequate defenses would give us an advantage. He responded, thinking about the plan. Exactly. Can I count on you to be ready tomorrow? You ride with me in the vanguard. I want you and your council close. His brother, no, cousin, told him, and it warmed his heart. The thing was, would he still think that of me when he knows the truth? Or would he banish me and want nothing to do with me anymore? Of course, I'll be ready. He responded dutifully. Whatever Rob decided, he would do his duty. That is what Lord Stark would have wanted him to do. Chapter 41, The Battle of Atlanta. 300 AC. Rob. He stood on top of the hill overlooking his chosen battlefield. Around him, banners were flying in the afternoon sun. Men and horses could be heard, but they all stood in position. As he had chosen to command the reserves, he had a good view of his own battle lines. In his mind he went over them one more time. He had split his cavalry in three. On the extreme left you had one squadron of around 2,500 cavalrymen under the command of his grand-uncle Sir Brynden. Next to him on the left flank was a big group of some 6,000 Riverlander infantry under the command of his uncle Lord Ed Muir. To help his somewhat inexperienced uncle, he had appointed Lord Titus Blackwood as his second in command. His uncle knew damn well that he should listen to him when he advised something. In the middle, you had a mixed group of 7,000 infantry from both his kingdoms. Their commander was the Great Jon, and he had a pivotal part to play in this battle. On the right flank, 6,000 northern veterans stood proudly. They would be led by his father-in-law, Lord Rickard. In support, Jon commanded 2,500 mounted troops on the right flank. In a thin line in front of his whole force stood 3,000 archers under the command of Lord Deddings. They would fire shots at the enemy archers when they came close and then fall back to prepared positions behind the line once the enemy started moving up. This left another 4,000 of his 31,000 men in reserve. 2,000 heavy infantry and 2,000 heavy cavalry. He had positioned himself here as their commander. However, in the ensuing battle Lady Mormont would lead the infantry and he would charge with the mounted troops. His battle plan was simple, but difficult to pull off. He would skirmish with the enemy until they came to them. Enemy charges would be mitigated by stakes put in front of the line and the fallback positions for the archers. He had also put a company of pikemen on each flank, to help ensure nothing happened there. He would hold the enemy on the flanks and tire them out. Tywine would expect him to go around the flanks with his reserve cavalry, but instead the Great Yon would open his line and he would charge the center. He would push through the center, while Lady Mormont followed up behind him with her troops. Together with the Great Yon she would fall in behind him and break the enemy center. After that, he would circle back and envelop the flanks. Although to make that work, he needed to force Tywine to commit his reserves to the flanks first. As such, Jon and the Blackfish were ordered to feint attacks to the side if possible. He was still annoyed that Lord Roose had ordered Domeric to stay with the main Bolton force. He had wanted him to command the right flank cavalry, but now Jon led it instead with Domeric's uncle, Rickard Riswell, as his second. His army was as ready as they'd ever be. Around him, an elite bodyguard had formed. It consisted of some of his friends and companions like Lucas Blackwood, Robin Flint, Daisy Mormont, Oliver Free, Sir Winfrey, Small Janumber, Sir Donal Locke and Owen Norrie. However, a lot of other Riverlanders had joined as well. Patrick Mallister, Hendry Bracken, Sir Ellery and his brother Sir Kurth Vance, Sir Bertram Cox, Sir Titus Free, Sir Owen Free, Sir Theo Free, Sir Eamon Rivers and a few others. A very interesting addition was Benfred Stout, a distant kinsman through the formerly forgotten descendants of Artos Stark. It was a strong company of men and on top of that he had Grey Wind and 2,000 other heavy cavalry to protect him. He would be fine. As he looked over the fields, he saw the Lannister army lining up for battle. His blue and white banners opposing the red and green ones from the enemy. He looked across the field and scrutinized the enemy army composition. Their archers were setting up towards the front, while 3 big groups of infantry lined up behind to counter his own. On their flanks, 2 groups of heavy cavalry were forming. He knew that the majority of the Lannister heavy cavalry was intact, however the Tyrell heavy horsemen had been severely depleted in the battle against Stannis and the Battle of Acorn Hall. This was reflected in the fact that the right block carried Tyrell banners, while the left and the reserve heavy cavalry wore the Lannister colours. Most of the infantry and archers seemed to be from the Reach. In typical Lannister tradition, a vanguard clearly made up of disposables lined up in front. He could see outriders, sellswords and light cavalry form up under the banner of House Oakurt. He vaguely remembered that Lady Oakurt had many sons, one of them must be in command there. He looked for signs of the other commanders. To no one's surprise, the main Lannister banner was positioned with the reserves. Tywine would lead from the back again as always, while he did it for the first time here. Their right cavalry would no doubt be under the command of Loras Tyrell, a brash youth. A thing they could use. He immediately motioned a messenger and told him to bring this news to both his uncles, starting with the Blackfish. The left cavalry was more difficult to see, but if he had to guess it would be either one of the remaining members of House Brax or the Marbrander. The infantry centre would be under Tywine's brother Kevan, as always. This could be seen as there was a Lannister banner surrounded by those of other western houses like Serret, Leiden and Swyft. On their left he saw the banner of House Rowan, while on their right to his surprise he saw the banner of House Beesbury. As he thought about it he needed to admit that the Reach had lost a lot of their nobles already, either dead or captive. Sir Bertram was apparently a good fighter and tactician, so it made some sense. The fact Loras Tyrell deemed him a friend might have played a role as well. His scouts had told him that the enemy had some 35,000 men in their army. This meant that they were slightly outnumbered, but if his plan worked that shouldn't be a problem. Satisfied with his positioning and that of his enemy, he simply waited in silence. While most others would have felt nervous in his stead, he felt calm. He suspected that this had much to do with his connection with Grey Wind, as he almost felt like a hunter who had finally caught his prey. Whatever the case, his companion was at his side as always. Soon the enemy archers approached. Due to his own army's better positioning, his archers got 2 shots off before the enemy could begin to fire back. Lord Deddings timed the volleys perfectly and they were devastating. Less than 5 minutes later it was clear to all that they would win this first skirmish battle. However, instead of retreating his archers, Tywine ordered his vanguard forward. He gave the command to pull back the archers and his horns blew the respective signals. The enemy vanguard charged into their backs but noticed the hidden stakes far too late. Their charge was horribly disrupted because of them, and almost all of archers safely retreated behind the infantry lines. The riders that got through the charge were met with his spearmen and quickly finished off. Seeing that, The majority of the enemy vanguard turned around and retreated back to their lines. They did that just in time, as his archers were preparing to shower them with arrows from their new position. Only a dozen or so stragglers weren't lucky enough to retreat quickly enough, their bodies lying between the two forces as a warning of what was to come. In response, trumpets could be heard from the other side of the field. Soon the three infantry groups marched forward. All of them were larger than his own blocks, but his forces were much more experienced and disciplined. They would hold, he was sure of it. With his archers now safely behind his own infantry line, they were ready to fire. Volley after volley was shot upon the marching enemy. His archers didn't target just one group, and with their 3,000 men they had more than enough arrows to hit over the whole line. The results were clearly visible, as dozens of men fell in all groups at every volley. The forces under Rowan and Kevan Lannister stubbornly pushed on, their discipline clearly showing. However, the force that was marching towards his left flank wasn't taking it so well. He could already spot small holes in the ranks that weren't being filled quickly enough. He could easily see that there would be his enemy's weakness. He beckoned another messenger his way. He ordered him to tell Lord Deddings to focus more of his fire on the back lines on that left side, once the forces engaged. With a little luck, he could hamper the enemy push that way. His flanks had to hold until Tywin used his reserves, and this might help his left at least. His right would hold. Lord Rickard would rather die than give Rowan an inch of land. He also had their veteran infantry at his back, so he wasn't overly worried as long as his plan worked. Soon the infantry clashed and sounds of steel hitting on steel could be heard, intermingled with wooden shield shattering and the death cries from fallen men. That was apparently the signal Tywin had been waiting for, as both his cavalry groups immediately started moving. Jon and Sir Brynden quickly responded with the forces of their own groups, although they were outnumbered. Jon clashed against the Lannister cavalry in a traditional charge, although a white blur could be seen breaking up parts of the enemy line just before impact. The Blackfish did it differently. Just before impact, his horsemen divided in two. Most of the charging reachmen barreled forward, hitting nothing but thin air. In a perfectly executed maneuver, both groups then charged into the side of the reachman formation and a wild melee ensued. He looked upon those developments and was pleased. The Blackfish was without a doubt one of his best commanders. While on the other side, he knew Jon had a lot of promise and Ghost would be a huge boon to him. His eyes turned back to the infantry line and he saw that everything was going well. The line was holding everywhere, and the enemy's right was slowly losing steam. Suddenly, all of that changed. At multiple places in his left and one part of his center, his line collapsed. All order broke down and half his left seemed to disappear in a fierce melee. He couldn't believe how that happened. What was this? What was happening? Some of his bodyguard rode closer to him, asking him what was happening. Some, like the small Jon, shouted at him to act, but before he could respond he saw the glimmer of steel reflecting sunlight out of the corner of his eye. As he turned around, he saw Sir Owood and Sir Tytos free charge toward him in the confusion. Before he could take out his sword, they were upon him. He managed to dodge Sir Owood's sword, as Grey Wind tackled Sir Tytos' horse to the ground with its rider. Suddenly, a war cry was heard from behind him. He saw how Sir Aemon Rivers and his kinsman Sir Theofrey attacked him from the back. In that moment, he could see his life flash by. He was saved by his squire Oliver Free. He threw his horse in front of his kinsman and all of them barreled to the ground. Sir Owood, in his anger, charged at Oliver. "Traitor!" he screamed. However, his vicious strike was blocked by yet another Free, Oliver's full brother Sir Benfrey. By that point Owen, Dacey and Tor reached him. They shielded him from the frays, as he took out his sword. As he wanted to ride in, he was held back by Sir Lucas Blackwood and Benfred Stout. "It's not safe, Your Grace," the first one shouted. "Stay back, while we protect you," the latter added. His anger rose. How would the Freys dare to betray him? He didn't understand, but he held back as his friends bid him to do. When he looked back, he saw how to his shock how Sir Pewin was stabbed in the back by Sir Theo, while he had been holding off Sir Owood. At the same time, Sir Aemon clashed with the Vance brothers. He saw Oliver laying on the ground wounded. When he looked to the side, he saw how almost nothing was left of Sir Tytos. Grey Wind stalking his way back to him to protect him together with his guard. Suddenly, Smallgen threw himself in the battle. He was quickly followed by Daisy, Owen, Sir Bertram Cox and Robin Flint. Smallgen himself beheaded Sir Erwood, while Sir Theo was taken care of by Daisy and Owen. Sir Eamon Rivers had a chance to surrender but chose to fight to the death. Although he took Sir Kurth Vance with him, stabbing him in the belly as he was cut down. Suddenly the fight was over. Quickly a circle was formed around him, as his guard looked for more enemies. Smallgen ran over to Oliver and put a sword to his neck. "No!" he shouted. "Oliver and his brother Sir Perwyn saved my life. See to it that they get the treatment they deserve." The Umber heir looked over to him with contempt and anger but nodded and called some guards over. He looked back to the battle and saw how a hole was forming in his line. He could see how Tyrell men were breaking through. He had to do something, now. He beckoned over a messenger and told him to tell Lady Mormont that she needs to follow us and plug the holes in the line after we clash. Afterwards, he turned his horse towards his soldiers. "Men, the Freys have betrayed us. Some tried to assassinate me and lay dead here. At the same time, their kin tries to do the same to our brothers in front of us. Will you help me stop them? Will you help me end that house of despicable traitors?" A huge roar came up from the 2,000 riders behind him. "Then ride with me. Ride, now!" he shouted as he beckoned his horse to start moving. In mere seconds 2,000 angry riders started charging at the back of their own line. These men were his elite. Most had fought with him in the Whispering Woods, as well as partaken in the whole of his campaign in the Westerlands. If any force could turn them around, it was them. When he looked in front of him, he saw how two smaller holes on the immediate left and in the center were being held. However, where the left and center met, a huge hole had formed and hundreds of reachmen stormed through it. He directed his cavalry charge there. He took the lance that was attached to his saddle and pointed it right at them. The clash that followed was something he had never seen before. They either charged through traitorous Riverlanders who had their sides or backs turned to them, or through inexperienced reachmen barreling through the hole in the line. The latter were clearly already thinking about victory, but they wouldn't get it so easily. Grey Wind took care of 2 footmen in front of him, while he hit a third with his lance in the chest. The clash was with such an impact that his lance broke. Without thinking, he pierced the splintering remnants through another footman's neck from close range and took out his sword. For the first time in his life, battle fury came over him. He hacked left and right and killed Free, Beesbury or Tyrell men indiscriminately, together with his guard. He didn't know how long that took place, but he only came back to himself as he noticed that they were pushing deeper and deeper into the enemy lines. He looked back and saw how the heavy infantry under Lady Mormont had already arrived. The line seemed restored, as the last of the Freys and Goodbrooks were being cut down. Apparently, it hadn't been only the Freys and their vassals that had rebelled. The Goodbrooks too, and, for fighting to have happened in the center, other houses must have also joined them. That didn't matter now, he needed to make sure he didn't lose this battle. His whole battle plan was done for, all he could do now was make sure his line held. If he could break this enemy flank, maybe he could still come out victorious. He shouted orders at his troops and his horsemen started going deeper and deeper in the enemy formation. The fight was brutal like he had never seen it before. Men from both sides fought each other first with their weapons, once they lost those with their daggers and afterwards with their fists. No quarter was given anywhere, such was the chaos he found himself in. All the while, Grey Wind fought around him. By scaring the enemy back, his direwolf gave him and his guard the much-needed space to push through from time to time. Soon, the first of the enemy Levi started fleeing and many others followed. Almost half the enemy line was soon in panic, and just when he hoped victory was in their grasp, he heard the enemy trumpets blare. 3,000 elite heavy cavalry charged at them, trampling their own fleeing men underfoot as they shouted for men to get back in line. Although horribly brutal, it seemed to work. The other reachmen stayed in line, while a few hundred even came back. Then the enemy cavalry smashed into the first of his riders and he knew he needed to get out of here. They were under threat of being surrounded, which wasn't something he ever wished to experience. He rallied his cavalry back towards their lines, killing as many reachmen on their return as they could. When at the line, his troops easily made way for his horses to ride through. All the while spearmen came running from all sides, to hold off the incoming enemy horsemen. When he looked around, he saw how 200 to 300 of his men hadn't been lucky enough to retreat. They bravely formed a rearguard, allowing them to retreat. Soon, all of them were being cut down and there was nothing he could do. Suddenly the sound of arrows flying overhead was heard. As he looked up, he saw how thousands of arrows flew towards the enemy. They hit Tyrell footmen and Lannister cavalry indiscriminately and he saw the last of his remaining riders go down too. A horrible thing to fire on your own men, but the only thing that had worked in slowing down the enemy charge. Lord Deddings had made a horrible choice, yet it looked to be the right one. Soon the sound of arrows flying repeated itself, as another volley flew into the enemy. The fallen and terrified horses soon disrupted most of the charge and only a few hundred horsemen reached his line. The spearmen who had arrived at the scene were enough to hold them off together with the heavy infantry and some of his cavalry. The line would hold, he knew the second he saw them making impact. He took a moment to catch his breath and looked around. He saw how his infantry line was holding, although they were hard-pressed everywhere. Their advantage in ranged support was balancing the enemy's numerical superiority. Yet, when he looked to the flanks, he saw how his cavalry was hard-pressed. He rallied the horsemen he still had around him with him and charged into the left cavalry engagement. When he looked around him, he guessed he had around half his men left. At least a quarter had been lost in the fighting, he knew. The others had probably lost their horses and had joined the line. He charged around, while the sounds of bowstrings snapping and arrows flying overhead never stopped. He managed to organize his soldiers in something resembling a wedge formation, at least at the front. They barreled into the back of the Tyrell cavalry, hitting them as hard as we could. The fighting here was no less fierce, although their charge seemed to have changed the balance of power in the fight in their favor. Even then, it was clear they were fighting the cream of the Reach nobility. Just before, he had only to cut through chainmail. Now, heavy plate with intricate details met his sword. Nonetheless, it still reaped more than enough blood. After a few minutes, his battle guard was countercharged by a group of enemy nobles. Their leader was a man with a silver helm decorated with golden roses, and to his shock he realized it was Sir Loras Tyrell. The Tyrell knight was clearly charging towards him and he disposed himself quickly of Benfred Stout, who had tried to stop him. He prepared himself for the fight, knowing of the man's reputation with a sword. Just as he countercharged, his enemy was thrown from the saddle. Smalljan had thrown himself at the man, barreling him from his horse, and the two rolled around in the mud between the horses together. He didn't have time to react, as a knight wearing the colors of House Ambrose charged him with a morning star. He deflected the enemy's blow with his shield but felt the shock of the blow rock through his arm and shoulder. As the enemy turned to hit him again, he was hit on the back of the head by Tor. When he looked judgingly at him, his brother-in-law shouted at him. "No room for honor or duels in battle, Red Stark. Just kill the fuckers and be done with it." Before he could respond, the Karstark had already vanished into the fighting again. He looked around and saw that his guard was successfully shielding him, so he used the time to gather his breath. He searched for the Smalljan and Loras Tyrell and saw both fighting each other on foot, as they each dodged riders from the other side who tried to help their opponents. If they could take down the Tyrell, the whole cavalry force might lose hope, he thought. He gestured towards Daisy, Owen, Sir Lucas and Sir Bertram to follow him, and together they rode over there, clashing with a few reachmen until they got there. Just as they arrived, Lora's guard attacked them. He saw coats of arms belonging to houses Tyrell, Graceford, Hightower, Oakert and Meadows charge at them. His guard quickly held them up, as he clashed with the knight of House Graceford. After a few strikes, he managed to hit the man on the arm. His armor protected him from the worst of it, but the hit was still hard enough for him to drop his sword. Instead of finishing off the knight, he pushed forward, racing towards Loras Tyrell. At the last moment, his enemy saw him coming and deflected his hit with his weapon. He cursed himself for the failed attempt, as he knew he wouldn't get another chance like this. Yet, when he looked back, it seemed to have been the opening the Smalljan needed to best his opponent. The Umber heir barreled forward and hit away the Tyrell sword with a sideward cut. He followed this up with a horrifying overhead slash. With his sword knocked away, There was no way for Soloras to deflect the blow, and Smalljan put all his strength behind the strike. His giant greatsword perfectly hit where the armor connected between the shoulder and the neck. It took the young Tyrell knight's right arm clean off in an incredible feat of umber strength. The piercing scream Loras let out would haunt his dreams for years to come, but he was soon forever silenced. Smalljan Umber went into a stance, brought his sword around and took his opponent's head clean off. The whole battle seemed to pause, as Smalljan picked up the head and undid it from its helmet. "Here lies your pretty flower knight. You have lost, give up or die," the giant roared, as he threw the head at a reach knight. He looked positively terrifying. His whole armor was spattered under the blood of multiple opponents, the color of it having mingled with the umber red on his tabard. His helmet was knocked off and his lip was split. His eyes looked drunk from the battle, and the blood of Loras Tyrell was splattered all over his face, hair and beard. The cut above his eye and the blood that dripped out of, only served to further enhance his terrifying image. He went on to taunt the Reach Knights, calling them nothing more than summer nights, while winter is coming for them now. He saw how fear was gripping his enemy and had an idea. He tugged at the back of his head and called, "Grey, over here." In a matter of seconds, the direwolf joined next to the great Yon and growled at the knights, spooking horses and riders alike. This was all most of the young knights needed, and they started fleeing by the dozens. Some, who couldn't flee, surrendered, and after the news of Laura's death spread, the whole enemy unit disintegrated. In disbelief, he looked around and saw the enemy knights fleeing in all directions. For the first time, he also noticed how the sun had started to set. As he looked to the east, he saw the battle. He saw how the line was still holding, although fierce fighting was definitely happening still. Just as he wanted to order his riders to regroup and hit the enemy right from the back, trumpets were heard from the other side of the field. In complete shock, he realized that the Lannisters had called the retreat. He looked around and saw how the enemy commanders were doing their best to orderly fall back. They had great difficulty to keep an all-out rout from forming. "This is the moment," he realized. He quickly shouted to organize the horsemen, and a few hundred started lining up, but Tywine had been expecting this. Almost immediately, hundreds of heavy horsemen started shielding the retreating army. As he looked around, he saw how most of his men had difficulty sitting on their horses, and he knew he couldn't engage. Cursing the Lannisters and their whole blonde-haired family, he turned his horse. He put on his kingly mask and spoke to the troops. "Men, we have won. The enemy runs before us, we have the day." His troops cheered, but he knew this wasn't over. They had managed to hold off the Lannister force, even with major treachery happening. Even so, they hadn't destroyed the army and lost a lot of their own troops. Then there was also Lord Tarly to the east, fast approaching. They had won, but at what cost? Half an hour later, he was standing in his tent, discussing the battle with some of his commanders. He was finally starting to get some information on their losses and what had happened. He had decided that he would sleep with the men tonight in the encampment, instead of going to the castle. It was too late and there was too much work left to do. It might also help keep the morale high. His losses were outrageous. Of the 31,000 men he had lost almost 12,000. 12,000 were either dead, dying, or too wounded to fight. That meant he had now fewer troops than Lord Tarly's force. Tywine, who probably lost around the same if you counted the prisoners taken, would also had more than him. The only good news there was that some 2,500 of his losses were actually traitors. These traitors also caused thousands of his casualties, so the rest of the battle had actually gone quite well. Sadly, news was still trickling in of more important nobles that had died during the fight. The biggest blow had been the news of his father-in-law. He had stubbornly held the right flank, even when part of the Lannister cavalry split off and hit his troops in the flank. He personally led a counterattack, repelling the enemy horse. He had fallen in battle against Lord Viorwell and his brother, but had quickly been avenged by Harryon. Torren had gone to his brother to grieve together and take care of their father's body. There was nothing he wanted to do more than join them, but he had work to do here as more and more information came in. He worked through it all, looking at the estimated personal losses some of the Riverland houses had given him, until suddenly Domeric Bolton stormed in. He was dragging a bound prisoner with him. A prisoner, who he shockingly recognized as Roose Bolton, the man's father. "Dom, what is the meaning of this? Ask him." He spit out, as he pushed his father towards him. The man sat on his knees and looked at him with hatred. Yet, no words came from his mouth. "Dom, tell me now," he ordered, not having the patience to deal with this after the battle. "I stood next to my father when the battle lines were drawn. Suddenly, as the archers were exchanging fire, he called me over and whispered something in my ear. He said that I needed to be ready to betray the Starks and Karstarks and that we would create a hole in the line for the Rowans to march through so they could win the battle. He told me multiple other houses would do the same and that you had already lost. According to him, we needed to preserve our family's power and join the victor." The Bolton heir all but spit out. How many shocks could he survive that day? He looked between father and son and it was clear Domeric was speaking